Sir, you're charged with especially aggravated kidnapping. You're also charged with aggravated assault, and you're charged with theft of a firearm worth less than $2,500.
You're talking about stuff that is not relevant.
Hello and welcome to the Court of Public Opinion. I am the Recovery Addict, and boy do I have a case for you today.
Why is the dog chewing on this guy?
I think they have got the wrong guy there.
They got the wrong guy, and the dog was biting him.
He roughened him up quite a bit. There's a lawsuit.
9 out of 10 judges prefer watching the Recovery Addict live stream in their court.
The fireworks are not done.
Intelligent commentary on the case. Dati mihi Anglican, please. Verbal slushing.
Is that correct?
I didn't ask you to interrupt me. Oh, for Trump's sake.
Good morning. Welcome to the Court of Public Opinion. I am the Recovery Addict. I'm a little bit off screen. Let's get a little higher here. I thought I'm going to start sitting down. And then I thought, no, if I sit down at the beginning in the morning, I'm never going to stand up. So, up we are. Good morning. Happy Thursday, Podcast Thursday today. Hope you can join us tonight. It's going to be a great one. I'm super excited. May have some special guests. We'll see. Fingers crossed. We're about to jump into what is, oh my goodness, we're on day 4. We're on day 4, the Tennessee versus Chen trial, and so we're gonna need Greeners to really step up his game today and make sure the internet is perfect. You were first in chat today, Greeners. Congratulations! We're sentencing you with internet ownership once again. You know what to do. Keep it running for the rest of us. None of us will complain. That's the deal. We've got that deal. So that would be great. I will let you know that the judge is here, and he's been texting me all morning. I don't know why. I'll get to him in a minute. I've got pressing matters. For one thing, we've got birthdays. We've got birthdays to take care of. So make sure you get your birthday nominations. Well, it's not really a nomination. Everyone wins when you're nominated for birthday. Oh my goodness, did I sleep well? I slept so long, like 12 hours. And then I just woke up. So I feel great. I have no reason to fall asleep during the live stream today. I'll put it that way. I feel fabulous. Made it to the post office, drop off a few more. As a matter of fact, I'm all caught up. I have not received any self-addressed stamped envelopes to send out stickers. I think I'm all caught up. I think I'm all done. Everything's gone out. So within a couple days, everyone should have received theirs. Did I get a haircut? A couple days ago, I did. From my wife, who cuts my hair. She does a great job. Judge is watching the live stream. Hit the like button, Judge. Judge, hit the like button. You would be number, let's see. What number would you be? 151. 151, Judge, if you just want to click that button real quick. Anyway, we'll see. We'll keep an eye.
Happy birthday. Out. You look good.
Oh, Judge Fleischer. Thanks for coming in, saying hi to people. Thanks for the stickers. I'm analyzing the envelope for transfer DNA. Ha! I used a wet sponge. You're just going to find like, I don't know, lead in the water or something like that. Just for yours, Greeners. Everyone else I licked. I just slobbered over the whole back of the lead. No, it's disgusting.
Thank you, sir. You're my new best friend.
Thank you, sir. You're my new best friend. Speaking of best friends, look at these birthdays we have today. Sherry Hines, Luna, Dom. Help me with this last one. Oyson? Is it Oyson? Can somebody spell this last name out in crayon for me so I pronounce it correctly? Is it Oyson? Spell it out phonetically. Ocean. Ocean. Oyson. It's Irish. Irish princess knows. I'm going with Ocean. Oisin. Oh. I'm not good at reading pronunciations either, as you can now see. Let me look at this one more time. Oisin. I'm going Oishin. There we go. Here's how the birthday song works. We're going to do this here in a minute. The judge's we're not missing anything. Okay, we're on a break right now. Oishin. I'm not sure if that's the proper pronunciation or not, but that's how we're going to go because the Irish girl said that's how it's pronounced and it said it's Irish. So for the birthday song, this is what we do. We all stand up. All of us, we can everywhere. If you're able to stand up, please do. Obviously, if you're in a car driving, if you don't have the ability, I understand. You get a pass. Stand up. You take a deep breath. Shoulders back. Get ready to project your voice to the back of the room. That means chin up. Get ready to sing full volume. You want to blend your voice with those of your neighbors. So look around to the people who are singing next to you, or in your town. There will be others. So get ready to blend your voice with theirs. It has to be loud. They're not singing quietly. So match their level. Project your voice to the back of the room. And I need the birthday song. And warm up with it, if you will. La 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 la. Now we're all going to sing the happy birthday song to Sherry, Hines, Luna, Dom, and Oishi. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Sherry, Hines, Luna, Dom, and Oishi. Happy birthday to you. To everyone who's celebrating their birthday today, including Sherry, Hines, Luna, Dom, and Oishin, happy birthday. I realize there are a million places you could be, a million people you could be with, but you've chosen to be here with us, and the privilege, the pleasure, the honor is all ours. Hopefully we can return some of that back to you and make your day just a little more specialer. Help yourself to free pancakes at Denny's, IHOP, Village Inn, McDonald's.
Good.
Thanks, Judge Fleischer. But I lost my train of thought. Other places. Tammy Dunlap's house. Waffle House. I think we said that one already. We got Denny's. Andy's Bar and Grill. Yeah, just pancakes. Free pancakes all around. Help yourself. It's your birthday. Make sure to celebrate. Apparently, free drink at Starbucks. Free cookie at Crumble. All the freebies coming your way. I think you should get like a free 2x4 at Lowe's. That should be a thing. It's like, hey, it's my birthday. Show your driver's license, your ID card. Like, you're right. Help yourself to a free 2x4. I could benefit from that. And my birthday is coming up. That's why I'm thinking of that. I've got just a couple months to think of what free thing I should get from Lowe's on my birthday. It's going to be lumber. It's got to be lumber. I think I'll contact Lowe's. I think this should be a thing. Because honestly, the cost of lumber for Lowe's is very low. It's got a fair profit margin in it, even considering all the bent, crooked pieces that no one will buy and they end up just throwing away. Free lumber. I mean, you get a free stick of wood. That's a thing. I'll make it a thing. All right. We've got a big air drum finish at the end. Even if you've never played the drums before, now is your moment. Grab your air sticks. We're going to hit around the toms and bang the crash at the end. Here we go.
If they didn't, I would lose my mind.
Yes, 6-volt bus. Like Radio Shack's old Battery of the Month club. Yes, free bidet at Lowe's is what they need. Oh, I still need to install the bidet upstairs. I need to buy the bidet. The problem, I haven't talked about the bidet in a long time. Usually we save this for the podcast. But my goal when I remodeled my bathroom upstairs from a 30s bathroom to a current bathroom was I want all the cool things in it. And right now we have a shower and a toilet and a sink and a mirror. That's pretty much it. So I sort of stopped before I put all the cool things. I wanted all the Hollywood style lighting around the mirror. So like makeup sessions, as I put on my makeup in the morning, which I never do. That'd be amazing. But I still need to do that. And the bidet was one of the options that we just wanted to go with because I've never. It's like lobster. I've never tried it. I've never tried a bidet. Why not? Well, I can tell you why not. They're freaking expensive is why not. So we went with just the toilet for now. But Sharon McDonald, thank you, boss, for making this a safe and friendly stream. We appreciate everything you do. Thank you, Sharon. If you could, I'm not sure if she gave me permission to share this publicly. We've got one of our moderators who's got some family going through a medical procedure today, and so been asked for thoughts and prayers. So keep Tish in your mind, please. That would be appreciated. It's weird. Our community is so amazing and so big. At any given moment, it's safe to assume that day is one of the hardest days in somebody's life amongst us. And then at the same time, that day might be someone else's birthday, and it's amazing to me, and I count this as a privilege and an honor to get this, but to have the burner phone and have people reach out to me and be willing to share both their highs and their lows of life, as the judge rudely interrupts my soliloquy. But just be mindful that at pretty much any time there's somebody out there who needs just a smile and a hand up and support or some prayers and thoughts. So thank you very much. Our thoughts and prayers are definitely with you, Tish, and your family. All right. Why am I still so tall? I have to do. I almost made a reference which would have been political. I don't know why that came to mind. I have to stand with my feet really far apart to be short enough to fit my camera. I think my desk's all. Why am I taller? The desk is all the way up, but it's not as tall as normal. I grew last night, guys. I grew. Thank you. Petrified, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate it. One of our long-time members in the channel. OG, even. All right, the jury was told to come back at 9:30, and I'm just checking the clock. That is about now. I think they were told 9:31 precisely. I don't know why the judge was so specific on the time. But decided yesterday while watching the microphone is really a Pringles can. Mel. Fun fact for you on a Pringles can. You can convert a Pringles can into a very effective Wi-Fi antenna if you're an amateur radio operator. If you're not allowed to modify the antennas that come on your Wi-Fi device. But ham radio operators have some privileges in the same band that Wi-Fi 2.4 gigahertz operates on. And so we can modify our Wi-Fi to have very effective antennas. Long distance Wi-Fi. One more perk for no, we can't mix the two. You can't use ham radio devices for public Wi-Fi purposes. I have back focus. Oh, it's terrible. Oh my goodness, I'm as blurry as they get. How about that? Is that a little? It was just plain focus. No back focus on this one because I don't have a zoom. But Zimmy, because you said back focus here, this is a bit of a technical term. Let me just brag for a minute. I successfully reset back focus on a camera I had never used before, mid NCAA college basketball game on the floor. No chart, no tripod, no one to help me. I call that a win. That's effectively the odds of doing that correctly, without the proper chart and everything else is it's right up there next to winning the lottery. That is so loud. I need that not to happen again. Whatever court you're doing, that needs to stop. I'm gonna put some limiters on so that doesn't happen quite that loud again. Okay, now it's gone. It can't happen. There's Mr. Chen wearing. This is tie number 4. Different tie every day.
Mr. Chen's in the courtroom. You can bring the jurors in whenever they're ready.
Your Honor, I have matters to address the court.
Okay. Yes, sir.
The state intends to call Dr. Toswell next, the medical examiner. There's 4 things I'd like to bring to the court's attention or get clarification on. First, I would like to avoid any. These pictures are, as the court is going to bring about a motion. So anyone that's in the galley that can't hold their composure, we would ask them to be excused. Secondly, we know the nature of these photos, the court has seen these photos. I understand that the state has to prove its case, and they need to have they need the pictures to be able to show them. I ask that there be no excessive dawdling. If once they've made their point, once they've carried on, there's no reason to leave it on the screen after the question's been asked, after the witness has been excused. There's no reason to have these photos exhibited to the jury for longer than necessary.
Well, if I understand the number of pictures, they're going to be about the same number we talked about in our pretrial motion. They'll be pretty much rapid, I don't say rapid succession, but in succession. I don't see any dawdling, but as far as on the state's part. But
see dawdling.
If for whatever reason you think that's the case, feel free to approach and talk about it then. But I don't think that's going to be the case.
He wants them to rush through the autopsy
What I'm
photos.
saying is that your motion is for the state to put the picture on, remove it, and then discuss the relevance of the picture with Dr. Cogswell.
I'm not asking about that.
Well, I'm not going to hamstring the state as far as the time they want. And the jurors, they need to listen to what's being said, and then look back at the photo for their own education.
And I'm not asking to impose on the state's right to do that. I'm just asking for it not to be excessive. Third, based on pretrial hearings, I know that this has been discussed in this court. We are under the impression that Dr. Cogswell will testify to opinions not contained in this report. We're moving at this time that the state are being excluded from asking Dr. Cogswell any opinions that are not contained in this report.
So what specific opinions are you thinking? Whoa.
The state has made it clear that they believe that Jasmine Case was bound and shackled prior to death. And that statement is not contained in Dr. Cogswell's report at all. It does say, the only thing that is relevant to that is Dr. Cogswell's report says that her Jasmine Case's body was in the fetal position, but never said while shackled. In fact, we would argue that the proof displayed or wouldn't show that anyway, so it could have been addressed on cross-examination, but it's fundamentally unfair to the defense to provide us a report from the medical examiner and then have him come up here and surprise us by ambush with opinions not contained in his original report and no further substance.
We discussed this in December, though, didn't we?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So it's raised your time. All right. Well, I think the time frame is certainly not equivalent to a trial by ambush. I think that if I'm guessing here, if the testimony is going to be that there's chafing around where the cuffs were to show that she was alive, or there's blood that was coming from her wrists, meaning she was alive when she was shackled, I don't think that's so far outside the realm of what the defense was expecting to preclude the state from going down that direction.
And that
if there's something specific about
that's
time
the
or
death
it gets
knell.
a little further afield to that, then you can renew your motion. But is the state planning on offering anything specific beyond that type of testimony?
Your Honor, the state intends to ask Dr. Cogswell his opinion regarding the condition of Jasmine Case's body. As an expert, he's allowed to examine other items of evidence that we have in this case and other opinions that are within the scope of this field of expertise, which we tender him as a forensic pathologist. So I would submit to the court that this motion is untimely. I understand counsel is attempting to, in essence, choke off the prosecution's case. I think that if there is something that he finds objectionable, he can raise that objection at that time. In the state can make a specific argument, but it's difficult for me to comprehend what the defense is actually trying to exclude. So I don't really know how to respond to the defense motion.
If I understood it, Mr. Wise is objecting to Dr. Cogswell testifying about an opinion whether or not Ms. Jasmine was shackled while she was still alive.
This is the premeditation.
He can. I don't know that he will. But candidly, Judge, if that is his expert opinion, I think he can opine as to that.
Well, again, I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. So this narrow field of expertise, I guess, regarding whether or not the victim was alive when she was shackled seems to fall within the general realm of his expertise. We talked about it in December. We talked about it in December. I'm sure people are aware of it before our hearing date. And again, I don't think that's so far outside the realm of
Boyd
what
Patterson.
a medical examiner can be expected to testify to as to exclude. So at this point, Mr. Weiss, let the motion be overruled. Feel free to renew it if it gets too much farther afield than what we talked about today.
He's not happy about
and
that.
And then the last thing is just a clarification regarding the demonstrative exhibit. Can the court clarify that for us?
Yes. Earlier, we had the hearing on whether or not your expert could testify. While there was no 12.2 violation to be found with the defense filing it on the Friday afternoon, we did put the state in a position where that's described a lot in the commission notes of where the state could be unfairly surprised. I don't think that in filing the motion on Friday necessarily is, ran up or crossed a deadline. However, since counsel represented that the primary reason he wanted his expert was in response to the state getting admitted that demonstrative exhibit where the picture of the victim's body in the fetal position was overlaid on a large blood spot on the carpet or in the defendant's apartment. I ruled the workaround would be that the state could not use that picture and then that obviated the necessity of a large part of the defense's reason that they wanted the expert in. So that demonstrative exhibit cannot come in.
Thank you, sir.
And, Your Honor, the state has removed that demonstrative exhibit from its evidence it has introduced. I've submitted to counsel the photographs the state intends to introduce, but I can think that Dr. Cogswell, within the scope of his expertise, can opine that the blood pattern on the physical evidence that we have here in front of us was created by Jasmine Case's body.
He certainly can, and if the state wants to put I'm sorry, yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, the defense, that would be a proper, I'm not agreeing with it necessarily, but that wouldn't be an improper opinion by Dr. Cogswell, so we're not.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir. And I've also removed the composite of the x-rays as well, consistent with what's wrong.
Okay. Anything else before we bring yours in?
Okay, so that was some spicy exchange, and honestly, I think the outcome of that ruling will decide the case. The defense was trying their best to keep the testimony that that Jasmine was handcuffed or shackled at the time of the attack out, because that shows premeditation. They already were successfully able to keep a demonstrative exhibit, which basically superimposed Jasmine's body on top of the bloodstain to show how well that they fit, which would have put her in that fetal position, and that's kept out. But now that the ME is going to testify and basically say, he's going to testify if there's any chafing on the wrist that would indicate struggle on her part while she was alive.
They've moved a trash can in front of the defendant and brought little napkins over here. If it applies to the gallery that there can be no outburst, Mr. Chen also needs to keep himself composed during this testimony, or he can exit the courtroom as well.
Agreed. But just listen to me.
Okay, well, the trash can was just moved closer to him. We've already indicated that he's feeling unwell. I'm just saying that's prejudicial as well, Judge.
Well, everyone has to comport themselves with maintain decorum of this particular.
Is he planning to throw up mid testimony?
However, this is going to be very graphic and personal testimony and the exhibits that are coming in. So everyone needs to maintain their composure. Per your request, Mr. Weiss, if there is anyone in the gallery that feels they cannot maintain their composure, this particular witness, it is best you go and leave right now. You know what's about to be displayed on the screen. So that admonition does extend to Mr. Chen, if you can. Of course, if for whatever reason, Mr. Weiss, you feel that we need a recess for him to compose himself, just let us know. Anything else before we bring the jury in?
Okay. We are expecting the next witness to be Dr. Stephen Cogswell, who is the medical examiner. This will be some tough testimony. The images will not be shown, at least not intentionally shown. If they are shown, I will cut away as well. But the camera crew has informed the court it is their intent not to show any of these autopsy images. Michelle Bachmeyer, welcome. Of all the days to come in, this is going to be a spicy one. I think we're going to see some objections from the defense. They are going to fight this issue, especially when it gets closer to that issue of Jasmine being shackled at the time of the attack. That's going to be a big one. John, we'll go over what you missed this morning as far as all we've had is some argument back and forth about how things are going to proceed today. It sounds like the exhibit will not be shown at all with the superimposed body over the blood stain.
Please be seated. Good morning, jurors. Hope everyone's adjusting to their new surroundings and they get a little more sleep than the first couple of nights. Hope you're rested today. As always, got to start by asking, was everyone able to abide by the court's admonition to refrain from speaking about this case with anyone who goes to media and reflect nodding their heads? I was given a note asked from one of the jurors, will the jurors be permitted to ask the state or defense teams questions at any point throughout the trial?
No.
Answer is no, as we talked about in our preliminary jury instructions, while lawyers present evidence and will argue what that evidence means and how you should take it, the lawyer's statements themselves do not constitute evidence. So evidence is the only thing that you're going to be able to make the decision on. All right, General Clerk, next witness.
Dr. Stephen Cogswell, Your Honor.
This is the ME.
I solemnly swear from the testimony about to give the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
I do.
Oh, good. He's got a loud voice. This is good.
Good morning, sir. Would you please state your full name for the record and spell your last?
Good morning. I'm Dr. Stephen Cogswell. Last name is spelled Cogswell.
What is your profession, sir?
I'm a forensic pathologist and the medical examiner for Hamilton County.
What are the duties and responsibilities of the medical examiner for Hamilton County?
Each one of our 95 counties has an appointed medical examiner. That person's job is to investigate traumatic deaths and suspicious deaths and deaths that have no medical history. In other words, unknown sorts of death. We have a number of other duties that involve cremation approvals, etc., but those aren't really germane to this. In Tennessee, all forensic pathology autopsies or medical examiner autopsies must be done at one of the 5 regional forensic centers. And those 5 are located here in Chattanooga, Johnson City, Knoxville, Nashville, of course, and also Memphis. So every forensic autopsy in Tennessee gets done at one of those 5 places. And that is where your state's forensic pathologists are. Even though all 95 counties have a medical examiner, not all of the medical examiners are forensic pathologists. So our job is basically, excuse me, to investigate those deaths that have some sort of legal bearing and determine cause, manner, and circumstances of death.
Would that be a function that in other states might be called a coroner?
Yes, sir, it is. And in other states where I've worked, I was in fact an elected coroner.
Are there educational requirements to be a medical examiner?
Well, if we say forensic pathologist, because it sort of arose by any other name situation, just as most of our medical examiners in Tennessee are not forensic pathologists, forensic pathologists are a relatively scarce breed. There's only about 400 of us in the whole country. And in order to become a forensic pathologist, you must first graduate from medical school and then do a residency program in pathology. Typically, that's anatomic and clinical pathology. The anatomic pathology being study of tissues. Whenever you go get a biopsy done and it's sent to the lab, that's anatomic pathology. The other major division is clinical pathology, and that would be fluids. So whenever you pee in a cup or get your blood drawn and get sent to the lab, that would be clinical pathology. Under the great pathology umbrella are multiple subspecialties: cardiac pathology, GYN pathology, etc. My subspecialty is forensic pathology, and we are primarily focused on unnatural and trauma deaths. And so forensic pathology, being a subspecialty, you cannot do a forensic pathology fellowship program until you have finished a pathology residency program. So we're talking medical school residency and then a fellowship to become a forensic pathologist.
He's the perfect guy for this testimony.
There's only about 400 of us in the country. In addition, there are obviously, as in every other field, board examinations that are done for each one of the general groups and the specialty or subspecialty groups.
You mentioned medical school. Where did you go to medical school?
At the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston.
What was your undergraduate degree in?
My undergraduate degree was a biology degree from the Citadel.
Do you have any experience working in the field of forensic pathology other than the Hamilton County Medical Examiner's Office?
Yes, sir. That's basically all I've ever done. So I'm closing in on 40 years of full-time forensic pathology.
Where did you work before?
I did my fellowship in Miami, Florida, at the medical examiner's office there, and then went on active duty with the Air Force and was assigned to the Armed Forces Medical Examiner's Office until 1998. Their job is basically to act as the federal government's medical examiners, both military and State Department and other federal cases. From there, I went to Louisiana and was deputy coroner in Shreveport and coroner in Bossier City, which is right next door, just across the Red River. From there, I went to the central part of Florida, just above Orlando in the Ocala area. I was medical examiner there for 4 or 5 years, I believe, and then went to Lubbock, Texas. From Lubbock, the forensic pathology group there closed down, so I moved to Knoxville, and from Knoxville was asked to come here to Chattanooga and have been here since 2013.
He's moving his way east.
Is one of the things that a forensic pathologist does perform autopsies?
Yes, sir.
Explain to the jury what an autopsy is.
It's Costco brand water. Costco brand
autopsy
water.
Basically is an examination of a dead person, both external and internal, with an eye toward documenting natural disease, trauma, and ultimately coming up with a conclusion as to the cause of death and the manner of death, as well as the circumstances of death. An autopsy is only one part of a death investigation, and basically it's generating the data to go into that investigation in order for the whole picture to become clear. So the autopsy in and of itself doesn't really tell you the whole story of the person's death. It also requires an investigation. We always say you can't do autopsies in a black box and come up with a good answer.
What type of other things would you want to look at besides just the autopsy as a forensic pathologist?
Well, we're basically doing the very same thing that your doctors do when you go to your doctor. We take a history and physical. And our history is what is the history not only of the death, but what is this person's history. If we have a young, healthy person with no natural disease that is known, we don't expect them to die of natural disease, but there may be something hidden in there that we may find at autopsy. On the other hand, if we take an old, broke-down fat guy like me, we expect hypertension, diabetes, a lot of natural disease, and that has to weigh into the conclusion if we're looking at how much trauma is going to be associated with death. In a young, healthy, strong, strapping person, it's going to take a lot of trauma to kill them. In an elderly, frail person, it may take only a very little amount of trauma to cause their death. And so we not only look at the person as far as what their state of health was before they come in, just like when you go to your doctor's office and they say, what diseases do you have? And you check that whole box thing. We're pretty much doing the same thing. But we're also more concerned with the circumstances surrounding the death, just as you are when you go to the doctor's office and they say, well, why are you here? I have this pain here, or whatever the reason is that you came here, they're going to investigate that more deeply. We do that as well. We rely to a large degree on law enforcement as an adjunct to the medical examiner investigators. We don't just have forensic pathologists, we also have trained medical examiner investigators who do the medical part of the death investigation, while law enforcement looks at the evidence and legal part of the death investigation. Ultimately, then, all of the medical information, the pathology information, gets collated with the law enforcement investigation to come up with a coherent picture.
In all, sir, how many autopsy examinations have you performed over the entirety of your career?
Honestly, I have lost count long ago. It is definitely somewhere north of 5,000, probably not quite 10,000. So I usually settle on a middle ground of around 7,000.
Wow. That's a lot, even for an experienced guy.
On prior occasions where you have performed autopsy examinations, have they included stab and incised wounds?
Many times, yes, sir.
Would you be able to place a number on that?
I would say it's at least multiple dozens, perhaps as many as 100, maybe not quite that high, but certainly multiple dozens.
Have you received any sort of specialized training that assists you in conducting autopsy examinations?
Well, that's basically the bread and butter of forensic pathology. During the fellowship program, you're trained not only to do the actual physical part of an autopsy, but also to interpret the findings that you see during autopsy. And much of it is didactic training, other parts are hands-on, and other parts are basically experience combined with that training and, quite frankly, a lot of reading. But that really is what the whole Forensic Pathology Fellowship is. That's why it's a year-long program.
Are you a member of any professional organizations dedicated to the study of forensic science?
Yes, sir. The American Academy of Forensic Sciences is a multidisciplinary and, in fact, international, despite the American name, group of forensic scientists, not just pathologists, from around the world. There are subsections. I'm a member in the pathology biology section, but there's also sections for criminalistics and jurisprudence in which there are attorneys, even psychiatry. So we have a very broad range of people networking at these meetings, and in this in the group of probably 10,000 or so, perhaps more. I don't really know exactly the number of Academy members.
How long have you been a member of the Academy?
Really since residency, so that would be 1986 or 7.
So nearly 40 years.
Roughly, yes.
Have you ever been qualified to testify as an expert in court?
Yes, sir, multiple times in multiple different venues.
How many times?
Probably over 100 at this point.
And you mentioned multiple venues?
Yes, sir.
Those states?
Those would be state courts in each of the states in which I've worked, being actually South Carolina, where I did my residency training, as well as Florida, Tennessee, naturally, Texas, and Louisiana, as well as federal court and military courts martial.
On those prior occasions where you have given testimony in all of those various courts, have you always been called by the prosecution?
Not always, yes, sir.
In fact, sir, did you have an opportunity to testify as a defense expert fairly recently in Bradford County?
I did, yes, sir.
In a case where I was the prosecutor?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Sir, is there anything about your background that makes you particularly suited to conduct autopsy examinations in this particular case?
Well, again, this is part of the forensic pathology training. We not only look at cases of drug overdoses and natural deaths, but also the traumas associated with stab wounds, gunshot wounds, motor vehicle collisions, airplane crashes, house fires, etc. Basically, any of the kind of trauma that you would expect to see in a fairly busy jurisdiction, city, I would say. That's what forensic pathologists are trained to do, so it's part and parcel of our training. Some folks like to semi-specialize, sub-specialize, I suppose, in various areas of forensic pathology. We have some folks who are particularly interested in cardiac pathology. These would be the ones that when you have a sudden cardiac death of someone who's apparently healthy and simply drops dead. Others are more interested in the trauma pathology, and I happen to be one of those. I have a fairly extensive experience in plane crashes and automobile crashes, as well as sharp force and gunshot wound cases.
You mentioned jurisdictions keeping you busy. Does this jurisdiction keep you busy?
It does, yes.
How many autopsies do you perform over the course of a typical week?
It varies widely. Generally speaking, since at this point I am the only medical examiner or forensic pathologist in Hamilton County, last year we did approximately 100 autopsies, and that's about our average, but it fluctuates from the high 70s to as many as 200 per year, not per week. That would be impossible.
That's a lot.
Thank you, sir. Your Honor,
per week would be.
Would you hinder Dr. Cogswell as an expert in forensic pathology?
Yes. Should the witness be recognized as an expert in forensic pathology?
Sir, as part of your duties and responsibilities as a forensic pathologist, do you sometimes get called to locations to assist in an investigation of death?
Yes, sir.
Were you working on December the 1st of 2022?
I was.
On that day, did you have an occasion to respond to a location in reference to an item that had been found?
Yes, sir.
You recall where you went, sir?
To Suck Creek Road.
Where is Suck Creek Road for the jury?
It borders the Tennessee River and is a bit north and west down to where we are right now in downtown Chattanooga.
Is that in Hamilton County?
It is.
What did you see when you got there?
Obviously, there were quite a few law enforcement vehicles, and off to the side of the road, adjacent to the river, was a hard shell suitcase that was laying in the brushwood area just off the shoulder of the road. Near that area were actually a couple of deer carcasses that had been tossed out there after butchering. But in particular, this suitcase was basically the kind that you would take on a relatively extended trip. Large suitcase, on wheels, handle, etc. After all of the documentation, photographic and location issues were resolved by the police department so that they could place it exactly, then the question came up, well, what is in the suitcase? And at that point, the cover of the suitcase, the lid was opened. Inside was a black plastic trash bag. And so using basically just hands, I could feel along the contents of the bag and say, yes, this is not animal or something, this is a human being inside there. At which point then the suitcase was closed back up, it was transported to the medical examiner's office, and at that point then we'll further examine not just the suitcase but also the contents.
Sir, I'm removing from this box item 173, exhibit 173 to the trial. You recognize this, sir?
Yes, sir. This is the suitcase that was brought to the medical examiner's office.
Is this the same suitcase that you observed along Suck Creek Road adjacent to the Tennessee River?
Yes, sir. It appears to be.
So you take this item with what you felt as human remains inside a garbage bag back to your office. What did you do when you returned to your office?
At that point, before we do anything else, then we're going to start doing photographs and x-rays because we're going to document everything we're doing as we're doing it in a stepwise fashion because we don't want to lose evidence. So in x-raying, we basically just laid the suitcase on top of the x-ray plates and x-rayed through the suitcase. And looking at those x-rays, it was evident that there is a deceased person inside, basically in a fetal position that is drawn with the knees drawn up and the arms crossed across the chest. And
metal also shows up.
Fitted into the suitcase. In addition, along with all of the hardware of the suitcase that shows up on x-ray, there's also a triangular metallic density piece that showed up in the area of the chest. And it's something that obviously didn't belong to the suitcase because there's a very regular arrangement of support bars, rivets, etc., that is fairly symmetrical. So after the x-raying was done, then the body was lifted out of the suitcase, and again, it was in black plastic trash bags. And at that point, then the suitcase is laid off to the side. That's no longer of medical examiner interest, that's law enforcement interest. And then I proceeded to cut each of the black plastic trash bags along one side and along the bottom and remove each of those in turn. Turns out there were 3. And as happens to be fairly common, at least at least in the bodies that I've done, in cases in which I've autopsied, where people have been disposed of in trash bags, it seems like the interior bag is always pulled up from the feet toward the head, and then there's another one down from the head toward the feet, and then there may be a third one, again, feet toward the head. In this case, turns out it was exactly that same way. I guess that's just how humans think. But so each of those bags is cut off, removed, and that reveals the body of a young woman who is in a fetal position, has no clothing on the top half of her body, and is shackled and handcuffed. Obviously, there's a lot of blood involved in this, and multiple stab wounds and incised wounds. And if I may go on a slight tangent here, when we talk in forensic pathology about stab wounds and incised wounds, those are two different things to us. A stab wound is deeper than it is long, and an incised wound is longer than it is deep. An incised wound is basically a cut. And that tells us two different things. You know, we're not dealing with just a sharp, pointy object, but we're dealing with a sharp, pointy object that has an edge. On the other hand, if you just have an object with an edge, like say, for example, a piece of sheet metal, that can cut you very deeply, but it's not really going to stab you unless it's pointy. So that's the distinction that we talk about. So when you hear me go on automatically about stab versus incised, that's what I'm talking about. Incised is a cut.
Thank you, sir. And you described the process that you went through when you returned to the lab. Do you document those observations and your activities and findings in any kind of a document?
Yes, sir. Every autopsy case, of course, has to have an autopsy report. And that report basically is an objective finding or series of findings describing what I saw. Some people tend to put in interpretations into their autopsy report. I was trained that the autopsy report is purely an objective thing. I saw this. And we leave what it means to later. In addition, we're going to take photographs because photographs are the best way to document things. We all know that. Picture's worth 1,000 words. So we have photographs documenting not only body position and clothing and personal effects, everything on the body, but also the wounds. And we'll photograph them, as we say, dirty, that is, without cleaning the wound. And then clean so that we can actually see the characteristics, contours, and details of the wounds themselves. Some of the things that we look for in wounds of any kind is this wound an antemortem, perimortem, or postmortem wound? And by that I mean antemortem is guaranteed before death. And what we'll see in those wounds is there will be bleeding into the surrounding fat and soft tissue. Because we all know that. We've all cut ourselves, and we bleed. And there's bleeding into the surrounding soft tissue, as well as out, leaking out of your body. Perimortem, well, let me skip to postmortem. Postmortem wounds occur after death. There is no blood pressure. If there's no blood pressure, you don't bleed. It's pretty simple. So those will not have bleeding into the surrounding fat and soft tissue. A perimortem wound, peri means around. So we have antemortem, perimortem around the time of death, and postmortem after death. Perimortem wounds can have some characteristics of an antemortem wound, but they're not definitively antemortem. And so for those, we say, yes, it occurred at or around the time of death, but not definitively before death. Because when your heart stops beating, you don't stop. Your blood pressure doesn't drop to zero everywhere because you have all these little capillaries everywhere. So you can still leak into your wounds a little bit around the time of death. This is complicated in stab wounds, particularly those where the cause of death, as it is in all sharp force injuries, is hemorrhage, or I should say the mechanism of death. Basically, all stab wounds, unless they actually hit your brain or central nervous system, cause death by making you bleed to death. That's the mechanism. So we look at, all right, what is the blood volume in your average person of this size? And it goes by size. So in a person who is the size of Jasmine Pace, just under 100 pounds, her blood volume is approximately 4 liters or 4 quarts of blood, so a gallon of blood. Now, if you lose about 20 to 30% of your blood volume, that is sufficient to make you unconscious. Anything above 30% is sufficient to actually cause death. So when we look at someone who has 4 quarts of blood, if we lose 1.5 quarts, that's sufficient to cause death. So there should still be some blood left inside the body, but it's going to be spread around in the body and the capillaries. The blood that's in the big toe is going to remain in the big toe. So what we're actually looking at is, where is that 1.5 quarts of blood? And when I'm teaching classes on sharp force injuries, look for the blood, because 1.5 quarts of blood goes a long way. And I use the analogy, everyone has painted a wall sometime in their life. That's a gallon of blood. That's 4 quarts. You can paint a room with a gallon of blood. So if you see a spot of blood this big and someone is dead, there's more blood somewhere else. Maybe it's inside the body, but maybe it's also at another scene. So that's why we say, look for the blood, because until you have found all that blood, you don't really know where the bleeding occurred.
Sir, did you prepare an autopsy report of your examination of the body that you found in the suitcase?
I did.
I'm handing you what's been marked for identification as Exhibit 202. You had an opportunity to review this document.
Yes, sir. This is a copy of my autopsy report on Jasmine Pace.
And is that something that is prepared and kept in the regular course of your activities as the medical examiner for Hamilton County?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, I would move to admit into evidence Exhibit 202, the autopsy report.
So admitted.
And sir, specifically this autopsy report, who is the person that was examined?
Jasmine Nicole Pace.
Thank you, sir. You also mentioned, as you were testifying a little while ago, that you took x-rays of the suitcase.
Yes, sir.
I'm handing you what's been marked for identification as a collective exhibit 1 to 4, number 203. Would you take a look at those?
Yes, sir. These are copies of the x-rays that were taken at the medical examiner's office.
At the time of Jasmine Pace's autopsy?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, I would move to admit into evidence 203, 1 through 4 as a collective exhibit.
So admitted.
And finally, sir, you mentioned the taking of photographs as part of the autopsy examination. Would you mind taking a look at this collective exhibit, number 1 to 27?
They don't want to accidentally show some of these images. I have no concerns whatsoever about this ME being able to convey every detail of the autopsy that's pertinent in this investigation to the members of the jury. He is really good at explaining.
These are some of the photographs that were taken at the time of Jasmine Pace's autopsy at the medical examiner's office.
Do they fairly and accurately reflect what you observed during your autopsy examination of Jasmine Pace?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, I move to admit into evidence 204, collective 1 to 27.
So moved.
Okay. Doctor, there's a couple of terms throughout your autopsy report that I think would be helpful. You've already explained a stab versus an incised wound. What does superficial mean?
Superficial means that it does not go very deep into the body. It stays on the surface. And these are injuries that basically, for the most part, we would just stick a Band-Aid on it and move along. Some of them may verge, of course, in the continuum from superficial to shallow, and then shallow may require some stitches, or deep. And the deep wounds would, of course, require actual repair, surgical repair or surgical intervention of some sort. So just as we divide stab wound or sharp force wounds into stabs and incised, we also have superficial, shallow, and deep wounds.
So a superficial incised would be a wide but very shallow cut.
Right. Well, more specifically, a long but very shallow cut.
Long but shallow.
Yes.
What about penetrating?
A penetrating wound is simply one that goes into the body. Again, we have our own verbiage and jargon. Penetrating wounds go into the body, but they don't come out. Perforating wounds come into the body, go through the body, and come out. So sometimes those are called, particularly in gunshot wound cases, they're called through and through, but that's not really a term that we like to use because it doesn't really tell you. So penetrating goes in, and perforating goes in, through, and out.
Is there a particular way that when you are describing injuries on the body that you can differentiate between right, left, up, down on the victim's body? Like how would you orient a person that you're conducting an autopsy examination on?
Every description that we do starts in a standardized fashion. That way, any forensic pathologist in the world really can look at my autopsy report and know what I'm talking about. So we have everything done according to what we call standard anatomic position. And that is standing upright, arms down to your sides, palms toward the front.
Thank you, Virginia.
Now, most people don't stand like this, but the reason we do that is because no bones are crossed. If we have our palms toward the back, we're actually crossing the forearm bones. That's the only reason that it's done like that. But everything is done in reference or described in reference to standard anatomic position. So when I say the wound is on the right, that means it's the decedent's right, not my right. Occasionally gets a little dyslexic confusion when you're looking at somebody, but that's what we mean when we say right versus left. We mean the body's right versus left.
Already Bay, the first few minutes this morning were
And
important.
with that, did you take those x-rays that you made into evidence as Exhibit 203 before or after the body was removed from the suitcase?
Before.
I'm displaying on the screen behind you, and there's a not a power, but a laser pointer. This is 203-1. Could you please tell the jury what we're looking at in this photograph?
Well, we can see the
Thank you, DSN.
outline of the rim of the suitcase. Here are the zippers here. Part of a handle mechanism here, one of the latches. This is a bracing rod in the shell of the suitcase. This area here is the logo on the top or the lid of the suitcase. And here you can see this is obviously a human skeleton in here. In the fetal position, this is an arm. Thank you. This is the arm. Here's the spine coming down here, the ribs we can see here. And here is the triangular metallic object that doesn't belong there. It's not part of the suitcase. We see another arm here and a couple of the rivets and screws, etc., that go up to making up the suitcase itself.
And sir, you mentioned the metallic logo that is the rectangular object, it looks like, in the middle portion of the skull. Would you mind pointing it out on Exhibit 173?
That is actually this logo here inset into the lid of the suitcase.
So Jasmine Pace's body was oriented head up if the suitcase was on its wheels.
Correct. In the position the suitcase is right now, her body is with the head upward, facing toward the courtroom.
Thank you. Sir, I'm now showing you 203-2. Could you orient us to this photograph?
This photo is moving over a little bit to, if I could point to the suitcase, to this area here that we're x-raying. And again, we see another one of these reinforcing ribs, a few more rivets, etc., etc., a zipper pull on the inside. And here we have a knee. You can see the kneecap here and the lower leg, the shin and the fibula that goes along with it. This is the thigh bone. Here you see a hand, or the bones of a hand, and you can see the top of the skull as well here.
Thank you, sir. Now 203-3.
And we're moving downward on the suitcase in basically counterclockwise fashion to this area down toward the wheel on the side closest to the courtroom. And we see again that reinforcing rib, zippers, rivets, etc. But we also see handcuffs and shackles, as well as another metallic device here, which is actually a bracelet. But you can see on this one, there is a chain that extends here, and there is no chain coming off of this particular one. And we're down here to feet. These are the foot bones, feet and ankle bones down here. So we have forearm here, the two forearm bones, and arm and forearm bones here. And so we're down here. This is her buttocks.
2, 3, 4, sir.
And we're moving over, obviously, to the last part, which is down here. And again, we have all the accoutrements or the hardware of the suitcase. We see a bit of pelvis bone here, the lumbar spine here. Again, one of those shackles that we saw in the previous x-ray. And so we have basically, by going counterclockwise, we have a complete picture of a small individual. At this point, we didn't know male or female because still inside the suitcase, still inside those black plastic bags.
Now, turning to your autopsy examination report, specifically the second page, you provide a description of the decedent in the fetal position inside the suitcase with 3 bags, and the victim was then removed from those bags. Was the removal process documented?
Yes, sir, it was.
Now showing you what's been previously admitted into evidence as Exhibit 181-1. You recognize the individual on the right?
Yes, sir, that would be me. And here is actually the body of Jasmine Pace still inside the trash bags. I'm cutting, as I said, along one side and along the closed end so that the bags can be sequentially lifted off and removed from her body.
Showing you 181-2, is that a continuation of this process?
Yes, sir, it is.
And 181-3.
And here we are actually getting to the inner trash bag. And now we actually can see, obviously, a hand, right hand, handcuffs, and this is an ankle and foot.
Thank you, sir. Going now to another portion of your autopsy report. Is it broken down into various sections?
It is. Typically, what we'll do in order to make it more readable is, at the very beginning, we have a brief outline that says what injuries were found. And then we go into an injury section where we separate the injuries. Sometimes we do this by body location, such as head and neck, and then another paragraph for torso injuries, and then another for extremity injuries. In other cases, like particularly for gunshot wounds, we'll take one gunshot wound and we'll say gunshot wound A enters here, goes through this body cavity, does this damage, exits here, and then move on to gunshot wound B. But we try to keep everything sort of in a logical, readable progression. And in a traumatic death, the injuries are the most important part of this autopsy. So that section comes first, right after the outline. And then we go to the normal, if you will, dissection part of the individual organ weights and what they looked like and were they healthy or not healthy. And then at the very end, we'll get to what specimens were taken and what findings we got from that.
So in this case, you indicated that the handcuff and shackles were a part of the general evidence of injury.
That's correct.
Were there photographs taken of the shackles and handcuffs, sir?
There were, yes, sir.
Showing you and the jury 204-1. What are we looking at here?
These are the handcuffs, and you can see this is Jasmine Pace's right wrist and left ankle. And
Mr. Chen's looking down. He's
these
not
are
looking at these.
handcuffed together, and you can see these are not law enforcement handcuffs. These are what you would buy at Spencer's or something like this. This is not heavy duty at all. And in fact, they have actually started to rust. In addition,
Spencer's?
You can see over here we have a better photo.
They have a murder
later. The shackle that is actually connected or was connected to this shackle over here on the other ankle and the area of the right elbow or right forearm and elbow.
Now, sir, what's the significance of the white item that somebody is holding towards the bottom of this photograph?
This is our case number and ruler. Because we're interested in documenting everything, all of our photos, almost without exception, are going to have a scale of measure in them, and the 6-inch gray plastic ruler is a standard throughout the profession. And we're also going to put our case number on it. Now, we have a case number system or a database system that automatically assigns case numbers. We get a call for a death, we assign a case number to it. It generates it based on the year, which is 2022, the month, which is December, and the date, the 1st. And then the following 3 numbers are randomly generated, so the 666 just happens to be generated that way. So all of our photos, except for very, very close-up photos, will have the scale and the case number in them.
Thank you, sir. Now, 204-2, what are these items?
These are the handcuffs that you just saw a picture of on her body. And again, you can see that these are not the typical law enforcement handcuffs. In fact, there's a little lever on each side that can be used to release them. So these, again, are something that would be novelty items as opposed to anything that was used for serious purposes.
Sir, I'm handing you what's being marked for identification. As 205. You recognize this?
The labeling on this bag is not it's not medical examiner, it's law enforcement labeling, but I do recognize the description of that.
Would opening it help familiarize yourself with the contents?
Certainly, we can do that.
Colors. Well, it's right there next to me. If he needs it. If you want to close it. Thank you. You're welcome.
These are the handcuffs, I believe. Not sure if we're going to see these. The photographers, well, I think we're, let's take a look. I hear him rustling. He's going to move the camera.
This internal clear plastic bag has the label from the medical examiner's office with the description handcuffs Jasmine Pace, along with our label and the seal, etc. Would you like me to actually remove the handcuffs?
Yes, sir.
Should glove up for this. As I said, this is probably going to be one of the most poignant times of the trial here. Ricky C., thank you for your generosity. Gifted 5 memberships. If I were the prosecution, I would use this witness for as much as I possibly could. His style he's very easy to understand. He's very thorough. He's not making any mistakes. I think they get a lot of mileage for every bit of testimony they get from him.
They are still wrapped in the surgical towel that came from the medical examiner's office.
Do we see that towel in 2042?
Yes, sir. That's
Riley,
actually
congratulations.
what those are lying on. You can see the edge of the towel up here.
A little too bright. Let's dial back the iris a bit.
Again, these are not the typical law enforcement handcuffs. They're simply cheap steel, chrome-plated.
They're steel. These aren't plastic, but you do see a lever off to the side that does disengage the locking
Those are the same
mechanism.
cuffs that we saw on the screen.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
The same cuffs that we can see here. Appears to be right hand, right foot.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, sir. There's another item up there, 206, sir. If you wouldn't mind going through the same process with it.
2 minutes.
Your Honor, I move to admit into evidence 205.
So moved.
And within this paper bag, we have again a clear plastic bag with the medical examiner's office label marked as Shackles Jasmine Pace. And these would be those that were, or the shackles that were removed from her body at the time of autopsy.
What's the difference between handcuffs and shackles, sir?
Handcuffs would have a short chain on them, and shackles would have a longer chain. Basically, the intent is to allow you to walk with shackles. So you obviously can't handcuff someone's ankles together; they can't walk. But by the same token, if you shackle someone's wrists together, that gives them a fair amount of space. So the chain length would be basically the big distinction. There's obviously many different models, types of shackles, but these, like the handcuffs, are not the typical heavy-duty law enforcement type. They're, again, the sort of novelty type of cheap chrome-plated steel, and you can see that it's basically almost a lamp chain as opposed to a heavy-duty chain, and these would fit together like that. So the chain length isn't very long, and these
Was the chain broken?
Both of these have still some blood and rust on them.
So, sir, I'm now showing you 204.3 are the shackles that you just held up to the jury, the same ones depicted in 204-3.
Yes, sir.
The chain being broken could be a sign
Where
of struggle.
were the shackles affixed to Jasmine Pace's arm?
In the case of the shackles, it was not to the left arm, but it was to the right elbow, or the forearm just below the elbow. So her left hand and arm were actually free. They were not bound.
I'm showing you this admitted into evidence is 204-19. Could you tell us what we're looking at in this photograph?
This is Jasmine Pace's right elbow area. You can see this would be the tattoo on her shoulder. This is her actual elbow here. And you can see 2 lines of rust, basically, along with the pattern of that chain.
Boom.
Again, with a rust pattern showing where the shackle was. And in fact, you can see
we need more than that.
The double part of the shackle.
There needs to be
is over
injury.
here, right at the inside crook of the elbow.
Sir, what is the substance darker in color that's adjacent to the measuring device that you have held up the elbow?
This right
Yes, sir.
here is blood that has dried. The lighter, more yellowish is rust. Now, some of this is rust and blood mixed because, again, her body is wet, and so the blood tends to creep everywhere by capillary action. So basically, the entire outside of her body has a thin layer of blood on it. And blood being very oxidizing, I guess is the best way of putting it, does prompt rust. So it's not surprising then that these handcuffs rusted in a wet environment being exposed to blood.
Thank you, sir. Going on to the external examination of Miss Jasmine Pace. 62 inches is what in feet?
5 feet 2 inches.
98 pounds, obviously, is just measurement of weight. How would you describe Miss Jasmine Pace's build?
She's a small, fairly thin young female.
You also describe down here genitalia atraumatic with a menstrual pad in place. What's that mean, sir?
The external genitalia, that would be obviously the labia minora, majora, etc. Atraumatic means there's no trauma visible. So there's no damage, there's no lacerations, abrasions, etc. There is, of course, blood because there's a menstrual pad in place. So rather than a tampon, she's actually wearing a pad.
Was that item collected?
It was, yes, sir.
Turned over to the police department?
Yes, sir.
From Annie, it's been marked for identification as 207. Please tell us what item 207 is. You don't have to fully remove it, just you recognize the item.
I do. This is the gray underwear that Jasmine Pace was wearing at the time of autopsy, and in it is the menstrual pad that's adherent to the crotch of the panties.
Your Honor, I would move to admit it to evidence 207 and 206. So then, thank you, Your Honor. During your autopsy examination, were you able to determine whether Ms. Pace was on a menstrual cycle?
She was, yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. You mentioned in your autopsy report on page 2 that the injury locations are consistent with the decedent's fetal body position as found. I'm going to show you now 204-4. Is this the condition and positioning of Ms. Pace after the final interior garbage bag, I think it's garbage bag number 3, was removed from her body?
Well, it's actually open. She's lying on it, so it hasn't quite been removed. At this point, because she's not even 100 pounds, just picked her up, moved her off to the side so that we wouldn't disturb any of the garbage bags. So just physically lifted her. But this is her position, and you can see from the x-rays that this position is documented by the x-rays that we took of her still in that suitcase. But this is obviously a fetal body position, basically knees drawn up, arms drawn up, and in as small a size as possible.
It's hard to focus a camera in the dark
Now showing you 204
if you don't have peaking turned on your monitor.
What does this photograph depict, sir?
This is after she's actually been removed from the plastic bags and is laid on the autopsy table itself before removing her clothing, the handcuff shackles, etc. Here you can see the position that she's in, where her right arm, you can see just the edge of the shackle around her elbow area. Her right arm and wrist is tucked between her knees, crossed at the ankles, and her left arm is basically free.
So when you wrote down that I want to make sure I don't misquote you, the injury locations are consistent with the decedent's fetal body positioning as found, I don't see any stab wounds up there. Can you explain that?
Well, this is actually showing, as you can see, this is the left side of Jasmine Pace's body. The stab wounds are virtually all on the other side of her body. And when we look at the other side of her body, in this position, basically we just rolled her over, all of those stab wounds and incised wounds are clustered in the area of her head, neck, shoulder, and upper torso. They're just all on the other side of the body. So this side of the body, as you can see, basically has no injuries.
So when you say consistent with the fetal body position, what do you mean?
Well, if we have, in a fetal position, by tucking our legs up and getting ourselves into as small a ball as possible, some areas of our body are protected, relatively speaking. Others are exposed. And if you have your knees drawn up, obviously she's not quite as tightly compacted as she was inside that suitcase. If you have your knees drawn up, you're basically protecting your abdomen and the lower part of your chest. If you have your arms crossed, again, you're protecting your chest. But what you're doing is exposing your shoulders and your back. And so the stab wounds clustered on the other side of her body are all in that area that is exposed if she's in that position. And they're all pretty much about from the area of where your rib cage comes together at your solar plexus up. In fact, there's very little that's even below the level of, say, the armpit. So this is all from head, neck, shoulder, upper chest, well, upper back, really, and virtually nothing below that except for that free left arm. Because that free left arm, if we roll her over, that free left arm is up here. The right arm is way down here, as you can see, tucked in between the legs, and there's no injury down there on the legs. So that's protected. It's out of the way. The left arm, however, is not. It's free and it's folded up across the chest.
Sir, you mentioned earlier that part of your job as a forensic pathologist when conducting an autopsy report is to look not only at the physical examination of the decedent, but also other evidence.
Yes, sir.
Have you had an opportunity in this case to look at other items of evidence?
I have, yes, sir.
Is one of them a photograph of a bloodstain?
It is.
I'm showing you what's been admitted into evidence as 127-4. Have you seen this photograph before?
Yes, sir, I have.
Is there any medical significance to the stain that we see in item 127 to the physical evidence that we have as 173? Oh no, I'm sorry, not 173. 158. Carpet.
Here we go.
When I first saw this photograph, it immediately struck me, and I think I actually blurted out, that looks like a Shroud of Turin. And what I saw here was basically a recreation of the bloodstain pattern, or a bloodstain pattern that I would expect to see if someone is bleeding in that fetal position that we saw. Because we have the feet and legs down here with the knees drawn up, arm down here, other arm here, head here. Now, obviously it's not exact because it's being absorbed and spread a little bit, but the shape is very, very consistent with not only the positioning of Jasmine Pace's body, but also the size of her body. And so if we look at the size of her body, the positioning of her body, and look at the stain, they overlay fairly well, actually very well. Now, can I say that's absolutely her blood? No, I don't know what testing was done to match that to her. But the stain is extremely consistent with her body as found.
Based upon your anatomical observations of her size and shape?
Yes, sir. Because the dimensions of her from her head down to her buttocks and from her back to her knees and feet, etc., that matches this very well. And as you can see, we have scales of measure on this piece of evidence, which was done by law enforcement, as well as the scales of measure that we have at autopsy. So it's very easy to match sizes because we have a scale of measure in both different photographs.
So, sir, you mentioned both different photographs. I'm now displaying 204 and 127-4. You mentioned no measurements. Do you see no measurements on the left 204-4?
Yes, sir. In fact, we have two of our rulers in this photograph. So if you were to basically flip Jasmine Pace's body over, rotating it on her feet, and just flip it over, she would fit into this stain very nicely.
So, sir, in your expert opinion, Exhibit 158, where is Jasmine Pace's head?
On this actual exhibit,
yes, sir.
Her head is...
You're still free to stand up if you want a better view.
Judge says this is important. Pay attention.
Here, at this area, that's this area right here, and that's where her head is going to be.
Let's see this.
Her head and shoulders are right in this area.
You mentioned legs and buttocks.
And similarly, this is going to be her back with her knees drawn up. There's a foot, knee, and arm.
Specifically, which arm?
That's most likely going to be her left arm.
And why would you say most likely be her left arm?
Well, that's the arm that not only has the injuries, but it's also the arm that is lying, or is, excuse me, I said left arm, I meant right arm. That's the arm that's got the injuries. The left hand and wrist has injuries. The right shoulder has injuries. So this would be most consistent with the left wrist area. I believe I said that correctly without confusing myself.
Thank you. During your external examination of Ms. Pace's body at autopsy, were there signs of obvious injuries?
There were.
Let's start with the head and neck. Do you, in your autopsy report, work from head down?
Yes, sir.
First injury you document, sir, on page 2 of your autopsy report is a 1.5-inch, slightly curvilinear stab incise wound at the vertex of the scalp. What would a curvilinear stab and incise wound look like?
Well, we have our stab incise wound, and obviously since we have stabs and we have incised wounds, there's got to be sort of a middle ground where it's kind of stabbing and cutting as well. And so that is a stab incise wound. Curvilinear means it's not absolutely straight, but it's curved. And it's not irregular, it's linear. So we have a curved but linear wound that is a combination of a stab and incise wound, and the measurements all refer to the length of that wound. And the vertex scalp is the top of the head. It's at the vertex, the most vertical part of the body. So at the top of the head, we have this wound on the scalp.
I'm showing you now 204-6. Is that injury depicted here?
It is. If we look, here is her forehead. Here's her nose. So just to orient you, so this is forward, and here's that wound. You can see that it's got stabbing characteristic here, and then it slices. So that's where you get the curvilinear stab incise. So the blade's going in, it doesn't penetrate the bone, it just goes down to the skull, and then it cuts backward.
Her right hand was shackled to her right ankle. Her left hand was free.
The next injury you describe is a 1 3/4-inch stab incise wound on the right forehead above the eye. Sir, I'm going to show you 204-7. Would you mind pointing that out to the jury?
That would be this wound that we see here. And here, obviously, now we've got what we call clean pictures because we've removed this, washed away as much of the blood as we can. And now we can see the characteristics of the wound themselves. This is that wound that we're talking about. And you can see there's a blush of bleeding around these wounds. So again, these are wounds that have some blood pressure with them, but you also see the underlying fat here. Our fat is yellow. It looks like chicken fat, quite frankly. And so when we see yellow fat, that's indicative of not much bleeding going into that area. So the combination of that blush of blood and the yellow fat would mean this is more likely a perimortem wound.
And again, what's perimortem?
Perimortem is at or around the time of death. There's not full blood pressure at that time. So she's bled enough to drop her blood pressure down. She's in the dying process, but she's not yet dead.
Thank you, sir. The next injury you describe is a 1.18-inch stab incise wound to the left forehead. I'm now showing you 204-8. Could you please describe this injury to the jury?
Here is that injury. It basically cuts across the eyebrow and goes under the brow ridge itself into the eyeball itself, so that her eyeball is actually ruptured. So the wound track here is downward and backward.
Next injury is a half-inch irregular stab wound. What is an irregular stab wound?
That's going to be one that isn't linear, doesn't have the usual characteristics of a straight stab wound. We've all cut up our food and prepared food. If you take your knife and you stab it into the roast beef, that's going to be a typical stab wound. If on the other hand you sort of wiggle the knife around as you're doing it, that's going to leave an irregular stab wound.
Now showing you 204-9. Please describe the injury to the jury.
The philtrum, by the way, is that ditch in the middle of your upper lip coming down from the nose. And here you can see it goes here, then curves, then goes down, and then curves. So this is a knife that is, it's a stab wound, but it's hitting bone and being deflected. So that's why you get this curvilinear thing. In addition, that skin is not uniformly smooth because you have the philtrum. So you have a peak and a valley and then another peak coming up, as well as the bottom edge of the nostril. So the contours of the face are very irregular and you're hitting bone, but not penetrating deeply into it. That's what makes it an irregular stab wound.
Thanks, sir. Next injury is a 3/8 inch stab wound to the chin, just left of midline. I'm showing you 204-10.
And this is that stab wound, and you can see it's very regular, very consistent, very smooth, very linear, but it's not very big, so it doesn't go very deep. But this also has that blush of hemorrhage around it.
And when you say hemorrhage, you just mean bleeding?
Bleeding, I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
Yeah, hemorrhage means bleeding.
Thank you, sir. Next, sir, you go on to describe a large number of stabs to the side of the head and neck. And for this, you may need your autopsy report to explain them. So here's Exhibit 202. I'm now showing you, sir, 204-11. Could you orient the jury to which side of Jasmine Pace are we looking at?
Obviously, this is the right side of her head, right here, eye, top of the shoulder down here. Here you see her left hand, which we'll get to momentarily. But you can see all of these individual stab wounds and stab incised wounds that are occupying the right side of her head and face. These don't go any deeper, basically, than what you see. They don't penetrate into the skull until we get down to neck wounds. Even this double stab wound in the ear here only goes to skull. So her brain is remaining intact. So there's no actual brain injury at this point. These are basically stabbing into muscle, soft tissue, etc.
And because it's not penetrating the skull, would any of these injuries be immediately fatal?
They wouldn't be immediately fatal, but obviously with this number of stab wounds, there's going to be a lot of bleeding coming from them because the head is a very vascular part of our body. And any one of us, particularly bald people who have bashed your head somewhere, know scalp wounds bleed. They bleed a lot. And facial wounds also bleed. So these are going to do quite a bit of bleeding. When we get down to these wounds in particular, these are significantly deeper. This one just behind the ear and at the lower edge of the jaw. They don't cut into large arteries or veins, but they do go deeper, and so they do cut through a lot more muscle.
Doctor, are these injuries that we see on the screen, 204-11, slashings?
Well, they're mostly stab wounds. Some have stab incise characteristics. That is, the blade comes in, and as it's coming out, it doesn't come straight out, but it cuts its way out and back. So instead of going straight in and out, it's in and then out at an angle. So you have more of an incised characteristic to, say, for example, this one. In this particular wound, this is a good example of where you have that little curved edge here, which would be the initial penetration, and then the cut coming out as the blade deflects, hitting skull, etc. So when you see this little fishtail,
when you say fishtail, what are you talking about?
This little double peak thing that you see along here, we don't see it in every stab wound. What we're looking for is basically the contour of the knife, the cross section, if you will. We look for a blunt edge, that's going to be the spine of the blade or the back of the blade. In a single edge knife, a double edge knife, of course, will not have a blunt edge, but a thin single edge blade frequently doesn't show you a good blunt edge. The other thing we're going to look for are the fishtails, as you can see here and here. And that's because things are in motion. As the knife comes in, it creates one of those little fishtails, and then a little bit of motion as it's coming out creates the other fishtail. So you have one coming in, and then a little rotation, and one coming out. So that tells you the edged part of the blade, or the edge of the blade. Even if you don't have a good blunt edge to see, that tells you where your sharp edge is.
Sir, if Miss Jasmine Pace was in the fetal position at the time of the infliction of the injuries, are you able to tell anything about the, direction from which the penetration stab occurred?
Well, these are all going away from us, and with variable degrees of forward and backward or downward, for the most part downward. Some of these on the skull, they're shallow enough that it's hard to get a good directionality, but they are all coming from her right to her left, and for the most part a bit downward.
Next, sir, you describe a injury to the right side of the neck with a 1/4 inch stab wound with 1/8 inch anterior blunt edge. It penetrates completely through the neck before exiting and transecting the thyroid horn as well as the jugular. Sir, I'm showing you now what's been admitted into evidence is 204-12. Can you please tell us what we're looking at here?
Well, for orientation, here we have the top of the left shoulder. Obviously, this is the neck. There's that stab wound on the chin that we saw before. This is actually one wound pathway. It comes in here and exits here. In the course of this, it actually cuts across the larynx or the voice box, and your larynx has two cartilage horns that stick up. Those are called the laryngeal horns, and they're about the size of a pencil lead. And the one on this side, the left side, is completely severed. In addition, the jugular vein, which sits right next to the carotid artery, is also transected. By transected, we mean cut in half. So it's completely divided. The blade actually goes through the top of the larynx and cuts through the epiglottis. The epiglottis is what closes off your airway so that you don't choke to death on food. So it's basically a thin flap of cartilage about the size of your thumbnail. And as you swallow, it flips down to close the larynx and the trachea so you don't get water into your lungs. So that is cutting right through there. The interesting thing is that it doesn't actually cut through carotid arteries, even though the carotid runs right next to the jugular. So it misses the carotid and it severs the jugular. The important thing to that is the jugular vein is a large volume of blood, but it's at low pressure. So you don't bleed as fast from a cut of the jugular vein. In movies and TV and books and stuff, they always talk about, oh, he cut his jugular vein and blood spurted out. No, blood doesn't spurt from a jugular vein or a vein cut. It flows out. Arteries are the ones that are under pressure, and that's where the blood spurts. In this case, the arteries were not damaged in the neck.
Now, doctor, can you tell, since it was a entrance on to our left, okay, on the screen, and exiting on the right side of the screen in 204-12, are we able to glean anything about the size of the knife?
The knife is going to have a relatively broad blade, but relatively thin. By a broad blade, I mean that from the spine to the cutting edge is going to be wider. So this is not your average steak knife or anything like that. It's what most people would call a butcher knife. Actually, it's a chef's knife. And it's the kind that when you're watching the cooking shows on TV, when they're rapidly chopping their onions, that's what they're using, is a chef's knife. And so those are going to have a fairly wide and fairly long blade. And the reason for that wide blade is to get the handle up off of the cutting board. That's the only real reason that it's that shape. The skinny blades are going to be more slicers. And if you're a knife nerd, then you know exactly what I'm talking about, but most people are not.
Most people are not.
I showed you 204-13. What is this?
This is actually the exit side of that wound, and you can actually see through it to the autopsy table on the other side. Here is part of the larynx at the base of the tongue itself, the root of the membrane that holds the tongue. And you can see there's a couple of ragged areas here. So the blade is not a quick in-out. It's an in with some motion. Not necessarily twisting, but some relative motion. Not a lot, because as you can see, this is a pretty symmetrical wound coming out. But it's coming in from the right-hand side and coming out toward us.
Doctor, the injuries that we just saw on the screen, it bisected the larynx with the hole on both sides. Would that affect the person's ability to vocalize? Talk? You're above the vocal cords themselves. Those are buried down in the larynx. So you can actually make sounds, but because the sounds that you would make are not just made by your vocal cords, they're made also by the back of the throat and the tongue, but you now have that air escaping out of the sides. And so what used to be one pathway is now three. So in combination with that, we have bleeding and a fair amount of bleeding. And so that blood pouring into that area is also going to affect the ability to vocalize, at least vocalize in anything intelligible other than just sounds, wheezing, gasping, bubbling, that sort of thing. You also mentioned damage to the thumbnail-sized flap, I forget the term.
The epiglottis.
The epiglottis, that was damaged as well because of that wound?
Yes.
What would the end result of that be with blood beginning to come out of the jugular vein?
Well, you're not able now to close off your airway. So now the blood is flowing down in your airway from that jugular vein. Of course, it's also coming out of the neck on both sides.
You're drowning in your own blood.
It's flowing down into your airway as well, down your trachea into your lungs. So that's going to fill your lungs with blood. It's not to the point of, quote, drowning in your own blood, but you are inhaling blood and filling your lungs with blood.
He heard me apparently.
The next injury you describe is an injury to the left posterior neck with a 2.8-inch stab wound without an identifiable blunt edge. I'm now showing 204-14. Tell us what we're looking at here, Doctor.
This is the back of Jasmine Pace's head and neck. We're obviously just within the hairline here, so we're up at about this level. And you can see this is, again, a stab in size kind of a wound where you can see the layers of skin, fat, muscle, and you're almost down the skull. But there's a lot of muscle back here in the back of your neck. And so this does not actually go down to damage the skull. So this is basically as far to the left as the injuries get. And certainly, given her position, and this being right across the back of the head and neck, it can easily be done from the right-hand side as well.
Are we able to tell anything from the coloration of the wound and the area of skin around the wound that we see on the screen?
Yes, this is one of those that would be certainly a perimortem wound. You don't see any blush in the skin around it. The skin itself, the cut edge, shows almost no bleeding, a little bit up here. The underlying fat is still quite yellow. And the superficial layers here of the fibrous tissue have almost no bleeding in there. So this is definitely going to be a perimortem wound. It's possible that it's even post-mortem. But again, this is just a gradation. There's no rigid distinctions between them, because obviously when you're bleeding to death, you don't bleed to death all at once. It takes a little while.
Thank you, Doc.
If I was a jury member, I'd want to ask a question about that stab wound to the neck and the,
Next, sir, you
timing
begin to describe
as relates to
injuries
death.
to Jasmine Pace's torso.
Was that an initial wound? The rest followed?
You describe it as a cluster of stab wounds on the right upper back from the base of the neck to the level of the axilla. You then describe the individual injuries themselves. Showing you now 204-15. Could you please show the jury where those injuries are?
Well, we've already discussed the head injuries. We haven't yet discussed the arm injuries, so we're in this area right here. So from the base of the neck down to what's called the posterior axillary area. The axilla is your armpit, and you have two folds of skin, the anterior or the front and the posterior or the back. And you can see that when you lift your arm up and look at yourself in the mirror. You've got basically two columns that define the front and back of your armpit. So this would be the posterior axillary area, and so we're looking at this cluster of stab wounds.
So, sir, the cluster of incised wounds on the upper back with a 1 1/4 inch horizontal stab with a discernible blunt edge at the web of the neck would be where?
We're in this area right here.
So that's the injury that you described there.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Next, you describe a horizontal 3-inch incised wound and a similar horizontal 1 3/16-inch stab incised wound, which are above the scapula.
Yes, that would be this fairly large wound here. You can see it's still fairly regular, but it has some irregularity to its contours.
You then mention a pair of horizontal 7/8 and 9/16-inch wounds just below the spine of the scapula.
Those are these wounds here. When we talk about the spine of the scapula is your shoulder blade. And we're not talking about the spine of your back, but the shoulder blade is a sort of triangular shaped bone. And in its upper portion, it has a ridge of bone that goes sideways. That's what supports the back of your shoulder. Your shoulder is not actually connected to anything other than your scapula and your collarbone. So that ridge of bone that runs horizontally is called the spine of the scapula. So we're not talking about the spine of the body, but of that one bone. And that runs in this area along, well, right about here. And on some people, you can see it if they're thin enough. You can see that spine of the scapula. You can sometimes even make out the shape of the scapula itself. But that's what we're talking about.
And finally, sir, you describe an oblique 1 5/8-inch stab wound in the posterior axillary fold.
That would be back here.
So that wound right there?
Yes.
Sir, are you able to tell anything from the direction of the knife into Miss Jasmine Pace's body if Miss Pace was in the fetal position as found?
Well, the position that you're seeing here would be the wounds are all following the same basic directionality. They're all going from right to left, variable degrees of front to back, and variable degrees of up and down, but not deviating very far. So there's not any that are going sharply downward or sharply upward. They're going basically right to left, some a little forward, most of them not really backward at all until we get to some of these other wounds here. But these, including the neck, would be going to the left and a little bit forward, which would be in that position downward relative to the ground if she's in that fetal position.
So, Doctor, what we see on the screen with 204-15, given the fact that this is the underside of the carpet, would Jasmine Pace's body be oriented so that her head and right shoulder would actually be up?
Well, up from what we're looking at is the back of the carpet, so everything is flipped. So her right side, the side that we're seeing here, would be the side that is actually touching the fuzzy side of the carpet, the side that you walk on.
So we would need to flip it over?
Yes, what we're doing is we're looking at the reversed image, if you will, because we're looking at the back of our carpet. So if we make the carpet transparent, if you will, and then lay it here, that's what we're seeing.
So if we were to fold the carpet
over 10.
If we were to fold the carpet back over, you describe the wounds as touching the fuzzy part of this physical exhibit. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So if we were to flip it back again, just to orient ourselves, you described your head as being here?
Correct.
meaning that Jasmine Pace's head would be at this location, but the injuries would be down.
Correct.
Fair to say that she was not at this location when she was stabbed.
Not during the stabbing, but placed there while she was bleeding heavily. So if she's there during the stabbing, I mean, the blood's going to flow out of her, but if she's lying on her left side as opposed to her right side, the blood is going to flow into her body cavities because there's no holes for it to flow out of the body cavities on the left side of the body. So she has to be actually stabbed and then rolled into that position, and then the blood flows out. Now, she could have very easily been a foot over this way and simply rolled over after she was stabbed, but obviously you can't stab from underneath the carpet, but we have to have a pathway for her blood to come out. And so that means that she has to have the right side of her body, all of these injuries, to allow the blood to leak out of her body or flow out of her body. So that puts her with this side of her body against that while she's actually bleeding to death.
Thank you, sir. Next, you describe a gaping complex wound with an oblique 2 3/8" stab wound crossed by 2 vertical stab wounds of 1 1/2 inches in the mid-scapular region. You describe the blade penetrating the scapula, entering the pleural cavity through the 3rd intercostal space and the 4th rib, which is splintered. You then state that the end of the knife fractured off and remains in the lung. I'm now showing you 204-1. Would you please point out that knife blade to the jury?
This is the end of the knife. It's a little bit rotated. It's not flat on, but this is where it is in her lung.
Thank you, sir. Now going back to 204-15, could you please point out the gaping complex wound that you described earlier?
That's this wound right here, and you can see you've got one pathway here, one there, and then there's another here. So you've got the big wound, and then the 2 crossing wounds, and the dark area here is actually going into the chest cavity, the pleural cavity. So when we perforate the scapula, as it goes in and comes out again, and it hits the 3rd intercostal space. The intercostals are the muscles in between the ribs. So the 3rd rib has the 3rd intercostal space below it, right above the 4th rib. So when we say the 3rd rib down and the 3rd intercostal space, and then the 4th rib, what we're talking about is the area of muscle in between the 3rd and 4th ribs, and then the 4th rib is actually splintered by the blade. So it's not just a cut through, but it's splintered in multiple fragments.
Sir, are there any vital organs inside the pleural cavity?
Certainly the heart and lungs. In this case, the knife blade actually goes into the right lung, and it's snapped off with the end of the blade actually propped up against the 4th rib, with the tip of the blade still embedded in the lung.
How deep into Jasmine Pace's chest did that knife blade penetrate?
Well, if we look at the end of the knife blade that's broken off, I believe it's 2 inches, if I'm not mistaken. Fractured section. So we have the 2-inch long section that is embedded in the lung, plus the chest wall, or the ribs, plus the chest wall, plus the scapula, plus the muscle and skin of the back. So we're looking at 3 inches or so of the knife actually going in before the 2-inch section of blade actually breaks off and is completely within the chest cavity. There's none of that sticking out visible in this hole. It's actually all the way down in there.
Now, sir, I'm going to draw your attention to another injury that we see closest to the ruler. I have a photograph of it. It's 204-27. Are we able to infer anything from this?
This is one of those stab wounds that doesn't really have a good blunt edge to it. Again, this is going pretty deeply into the body, and I believe this one is the one that goes into the shoulder just above the axilla and fractures the second rib posterolaterally, and that means the back side, or the side and back of the rib. So what we're looking at here, here's the armpit right here, and so this blade is going forward and a little bit upward, and it hits the back of the second rib and breaks it.
And when you say upward, is that using the standard anatomical description, like up towards head, or are we talking up from ground?
No, we're talking up towards head. Again, standard anatomic position.
Just wanted to make sure I wasn't confused. Doctor, were you ultimately able to recover the knife blade from Jasmine Case's chest?
I was, yes, sir.
Here comes the blade tip itself.
So I'm handing you what's been admitted into evidence as Exhibit 177. Would you mind opening that up?
Should be packaged in plastic first. Okay. He's probably going to fully open this package up. Glove up and everything.
This is the cup that contains the broken end of the knife blade as recovered at the time of autopsy from the medical examiner's office.
Looks like he gets a little help. He's not opening things fast enough. This is like me on Christmas with my kids, only it's a bit more morbid. This is the part that the jury wants to see.
And
oh my goodness.
you can see that it has the general contour of what you'd expect to see from a chef's knife. I can't tell you exactly how long that blade is because they vary in how wide they are. But you can see the very tip end of it is broken off, and that was not recovered at autopsy. But this part of the blade is all the way embedded in the chest. If we assume that my fingers are ribs, then in this case the knife isn't like this through the ribs. If the lung is here, the knife is actually, or the tip of the end of the knife is actually all the way in and propped up against the inside of the ribs itself, embedded all the way into the lung.
that injury fatal?
It's certainly likely to be eventually because there is a large hole from the chest wall into the pleural cavity, that is the chest cavity. There's no longer a vacuum in there, and our lungs rely on having a vacuum inside our chest cavity to expand. As our diaphragm goes down when we breathe, it creates more vacuum and air gets sucked in that way. If you make a hole in there, we no longer have a vacuum. So then that right lung basically becomes non-functional. There's still blood flowing to it, and so of course it's bleeding, but it's not doing you any good in exchanging air because you can't get any air into that collapsed lung. So the only lung that's working for you is your left lung.
The way that blade snapped across it like that, that is from force where the blade itself is bent. So the pressure from the handle towards the tip causing the blade to bend and snap on the inside.
Next, you describe a contusion 3.5 by 1 inch to the right chest. Showing you what's been admitted into evidence is 2 of 417. Can you please point out the large contusion 3.5 by 1 inch?
That's this contusion here. It actually has a little blood blister in the middle of it. This is the back of Jasmine Pace's torso. Her front is here. You can see her armpit here. And this is the right upper arm. And here is this large pink to red contusion.
Do contusions form, post-mortem?
Well, blood has to flow into a bruise. A contusion is a bruise. And so blood has to flow into the area because what you're doing to make a bruise is crushing tissue. And when you crush tissue, you actually rupture capillaries, and the capillaries leak into that area. That's how we get a bruise. And so you actually have to have blood pressure to flow into the area of damage before you get a contusion.
So how long does it take for a contusion such as that to form?
It can be a matter of minutes. Depends on what the blood pressure is and how much damage is done. Obviously, you damage more capillaries, you're going to get more bleeding, and so the contusion is going to become visible. The other thing that matters in the formation of a contusion is how deep is it, which again goes back to how much tissue did you crush. A small bump may not pop up a bruise until later on that day, possibly even the next day. But you fall off a ladder and you give yourself a really good whack, you're going to have that contusion by the time you pick yourself up. So again, a lot depends on how quickly or how much damage is done will depend on how quickly the contusion or bruise shows up.
Sir, in this case, how deep was this contusion?
This one goes through skin, through the subcutaneous fat, and just to the outer layer of chest wall muscle. So this is a fairly deep contusion. It's not one that involves a lot of the chest wall muscle, but it's not trivial either.
When you say it's not trivial either, are you able to describe the amount of force that would cause that kind of injury?
Well, the amount of force is frequently asked, and as forensic pathologists, we don't like to do that because there's a lot of variables involved. In this case, we have a thin young woman who doesn't have a lot of subcutaneous fat, so the amount of force it would take to cause that contusion may be different than a robust male or an older person, et cetera, et cetera. So this is, again, not something that is likely to come up in her from just bumping into the counter. This is going to be like a fall against a counter or a blow or something that is going to get her attention, if you will, not one of those where you hit your elbow and you didn't notice it, and then later on you realize, oh crap, I gave myself a bruise.
You mentioned get her attention. What kind of, I guess, physical effects could an impact like that have on a person?
Well, it depends again on the amount of force and whether you're ready for it, if you will. But certainly it's going to stagger you for a bit. It's not necessarily going to knock you out or anything, but there are other bruises on her, particularly on her neck area, that would be more likely to cause, if not unconsciousness, at least semi-consciousness.
Could it knock the wind out of you?
It could. Typically, that's caused by a spasm of your diaphragm, but a blow there can cause you to have that wind knocked out of you effect, which is your diaphragm suddenly quits moving because the nerve in it has been overloaded and basically gets short-term electrocuted, and so it spasms down. That's why you can't breathe, because your diaphragm doesn't work.
Thank you, sir. You mentioned bruising the neck.
Yes, sir. On the front of Jasmine Pace's neck, there's a number of abrasions and faint bruises, but the abrasions aren't associated with any stab wounds. And typically, this would be an indicator of we need to go and do a formal layer-wise neck dissection looking for things like manual strangulation. But if you already have a stab wound that goes clear through the neck, there's going to be bleeding into those neck muscles that we would be looking for. And so that basically negates the use of those neck muscles. We call them strap muscles because they're thin and flat. And the only other things we would be able to use would be the larynx, typically those thyroid horns that we talked about that stick up and are about the size of a pencil lead, or the hyoid bone.
This was a dating relationship.
In young people, that's problematic because
fairly new,
young
though.
people are flexible. We all know this. And in a young person, your hyoid bone isn't yet fused. It's still in 3 pieces. So it's very flexible. You can squeeze it from the side and it won't break. The larynx is the same way, very flexible. You can squeeze it. When you get old and you start to calcify these things, then they become rigid and brittle, and that's where we'll see fracture. So in her case, in Jasmine's case, there's no fracture of the hyoid bone, but it is quite flexible, and there's no fracture of the thyroid cartilage, except for the knife blade cutting off that thyroid horn. But again, she has a very flexible larynx. So can I tell you that she was manually strangled? No, I cannot. The only thing I've got is the abrasions on the outside of her neck, a little bit of surrounding contusion that may be associated with it, but don't have to be.
I'm showing you 204-12. Would you mind pointing out those observations that you just made to the jury?
This is what we're talking about here. You can see these reddening areas along here. Those are bruises, because bruises, again, is just bleeding into that area. And you can see it around here, too, where we have that blush of hemorrhage. And we actually have some abrasion on the front of the neck. And remember, there's no clothing on. So we have unexplained bruises and abrasions on the front of her neck. They may indicate a degree of manual strangulation or choking, but I can't tell you definitively that that is what happened. It's simply that that's a marker that is consistent with that and frequently seen during that.
Thank you, Doc. Next, moving on to the extremities, you described an injury to the right shoulder with a 3.5 by 1 1/4 complex incised wound comprising 4 incisions. I'm now showing you 204-15. Could you please point out the injury that you're describing there?
This is that injury, and you can see that it doesn't go very deep. These are slices. And you can count them in there. There's 1, 2, and you can see how it slices up here. So we're actually slicing up sections of skin and underlying subcutaneous fat and a little bit of muscle of the actual shoulder itself.
Now, doctor, I'm going to zoom in. Are you able to tell us anything about the color of the injuries and redness to the surrounding area?
Well, if you look at these areas in here, there's more redness to them. You can see this is nice and red here. This is the one that goes all the way through the neck. But look at how yellow this is relative to the amount of yellow fat displayed in this one. So this is going to be more of the antemortem side of that wound.
That points to torture.
You know, that gradation going across from antemortem to perimortem. In her case, I don't see any definitive post-mortem wounds. I see perimortem wounds that are probably right near death. But again, death doesn't occur instantaneously. You're bleeding to death, and so it's a relatively slow process.
Thank you, Doc. Next, you describe mid-portion of the shoulder with a complex 1 3/4 by 1 1/2 stab wound with 4 separate stabs. Going back to that same photograph, 204-15, could you describe the location of that?
This is actually that wound. It sort of has the shape of a Z, but you can see there's 1, 2, 3, and then a 4th one right there. This wound is actually one of the more damaging wounds because unlike this wound here, which is more dramatic, if you will, this time the knife actually penetrates into the armpit. And in your armpit, you not only have a bundle of nerves called the brachial plexus, you also have artery and vein going into your arm and providing blood to your hand. So in this case, not only the nerves of the brachial plexus, but also the artery and vein of the brachial artery and vein are damaged and severed. So now we have not just venous blood under low pressure, large volume, but arterial blood, high pressure. So this wound is going to bleed pretty significantly. A lot of that blood is going to be internal, but it's going to work its way out. And the internal bleeding is going to come about because the multiple layers of muscle will sort of close over and block off a lot of that bleeding. But because we have that Z shape where you're cutting not only with the muscle fibers but across the muscle fibers, that's going to be more open and allow more bleeding to occur. So this one is going to bleed pretty significantly.
Thank you, sir.
Wow.
Next, you describe just below the complex wound, a blade 1 3/8" stab wound with a 1/8" one edge. Both this stab wound and the complex wound penetrate the axilla as described to the jury. Sir, showing you, going back to the same picture, 204-15, where is that?
There we have this wound, which goes upward in the arm and actually gets into the axilla as well. So these two are creating a fairly large amount of damage into the muscle of the upper arm going into the axilla or the armpit area and doing a lot of damage to the vasculature and nerves in that area.
Next, you describe an injury to the right elbow with a quarter-inch superficial incised wound with surrounding abrasion. I don't believe that we have a photograph of that, do we, Doctor?
I don't believe so, but it's actually on the elbow itself, superficial wound, a little bit of abrasion around it.
Would it be a fatal?
It would not be, no, sir.
Okay. Next, sir, you describe a right wrist with a 2 3/4-inch incised braided contusion on the ulnar aspect with a 1/2-inch contusion on the radial aspect. I'm showing you 204/18.
This is a handcuff bruise. This is a handcuff bruise.
This is the contusion on the ulnar aspect. Actually, here, this is the one we were just talking about.
Oh, okay.
The bones of the forearm are the ulna and the radius. The radius goes to the thumb. And so the thumb side is the radius and the ulna, the little finger side is the ulna. So if we look at the outside of our arm, forearm, that's the ulnar side. And so this bruise here, this contusion, is going to be the one on the ulnar side. There's also another one on the radial side or the thumb side.
Right down here on the arm, these two bones on the outside.
You mentioned the thumb side with a 1/2-inch contusion on radial aspect. Sir, would you mind pointing it out?
That's right here.
Next to the tattoo?
Next to the tattoo with the handcuff.
Judge, it's 204/20. Sir? Next, sir, you describe a incised wound to the right palm with a 1 1/4 horizontal incised wound of the distal undetermining just proximal to the ring and middle fingers. And I butchered that. Sir, would you mind pointing out that injury?
This is that injury. You notice all the wrinkling of the hand that whenever we're in water, we all see it. We call it washerwoman skin. More formally, it's immersion changes. But the undermining is what we call the term used when the blade scoops under the skin and cuts. And we've all done it to ourselves. But in this case, you have sort of a curvilinear shape here, and instead of a stab going in and through, it's more of a slice. But it doesn't come this way, it comes this way. It comes from the palm toward the fingertips. So that's what that distal is. Distal means toward the outside, proximal means toward the core of the body. So distal undermining means that the wound itself is cut this way.
Is that the only injury to the right arm and hand?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Next, we move on to the left arm. No injuries to the upper arm and forearm. You describe a 1/4-inch superficial stab wound to the right wrist, the left wrist. I'm showing you 204-25. Can you please point out that injury?
That's this wound here. You can see it's relatively small, and the anterior surface, again, using that standard anatomic position, anterior means front. So our hands, palms of the hands are toward the front. So the anterior surface, it's also called the ventral surface. The back is the dorsum, the belly of something is called the ventral. When we go fishing, the fish have a vent. That's on their ventral side. That's this wound, and it does not go in.
There's a reference I wasn't expecting.
And does not sever the tendons that go to the arm, or the hand, rather.
The next injury you describe is an injury to the wrist, 1/4-inch vertical stab wound, showing you 204-22.
That's on the ulnar surface there. Again, you can see that this is the outside, the little finger side of the hand.
Thank you.
These sound more defensive injuries.
Posterior ulnar. What that means is the ulnar, or the little finger side, and the posterior, or the back. So the back little finger side of the wrist, which would be this area right here.
Hand up like this. So back
has a 2 1/4 by 3/4 inch stab wound comprised of 3 separate stabs in an arrowhead shape. They penetrate the ulnar. Is that a bone, sir?
That is a bone, yes, sir.
And inside the ulnar artery. Sir, I'm now showing you 204-15. Would you mind pointing out where that wound complex is?
That's this wound here. And again, we have an injury to an artery. And the ulnar artery is not a real big artery, but you can sometimes feel your pulse in that. Most people, when they feel the pulse in their wrist, they go for the radial artery. But there's also one at the ulnar artery. And so this is cut as well. So not only do you have fracture of the bone and incised wounds of the area of the wrist, you've also got an incision through an artery. So we have the jugular vein in the neck. We have the axillary artery in the armpit, and now we have the ulnar artery in the wrist.
It goes through the wrist.
So we have 2 sources of arterial bleeding and 1 source of significant venous bleeding. The jugular vein is, as you would expect, a quite large vein, since it brings blood back from the head.
Now showing you 204-23. You describe an arrowhead shape. Can you point that out to the jury?
That's actually, we could probably see it a little better in the other picture, but basically we're talking about this area here.
Thank you, sir. Next, you describe a 5/16 inch superficial stab wound at the junction of thumb and wrist, showing you 204-24.
And
can also
that's
be
this. You can see a little bit of skin
like
that's actually pulled up because the tip of the blade doesn't go in very far and just lifts up a little bit of skin. This doesn't go in deeply. It doesn't hit any major vasculature or bone.
You describe a 1 3/8 inch stab wound with a 1/16 inch blunt edge just below the distal wrist, and it goes completely through the hand, exiting the palm with a 1 1/4 inch wound. Would you mind pointing it out to the jury on 204-23?
That's this wound here, and you can see the depth of that wound, and that actually goes all the way through and comes out on the palm side of the hand right through here.
Showing now 204-25, the injury you described is at the, I guess, center of the photograph.
That's correct, yes, right here.
Thank you. You then describe a 1 1/2 incised wound exiting through the back of the palm. Is that what we see in 204-23?
That's this wound here. Basically, it's a slice across the little finger side of the hand that goes all the way through this area of muscle along here.
I'm now showing you the back of the hand, 204-25. Doctor, are you able to tell from looking at this which direction the hand was facing at the time of the incised wound?
No, sir. It's basically horizontal or across the long axis of the hand. So it could be like this, it could be like this. Depending on how the wrist is turned, would depend on or would vary the angle of the knife. So it's just an incised wound, it's not a stab.
What about the preceding injury that went through and through? don't use the term, I'm sorry, that entered on the dorsal side and exited on the ventral side?
That actually obviously is coming from the back or back of the hand toward the palm. And so if we take the left hand and put it in the position, then the wound is coming in this way. If we put it in this position, then it's different from all of our other wounds that are on the right-hand side. So if we lay that left hand out, then we've got to turn it over for the blade to go in the back and come out the palm. So we have multiple variable ways that we can have the direction of the knife going relative to her body, depending on where the arm is and where the hand is and how it's rotated. So because that left arm and hand are free, that is, they can move in any direction that you can normally move your hand and arm, you can't lock her into a rigid position for that wound. Now, if we put her hand where we found it, when she when the bags were unwrapped from around her body, it's in this position. So a blade coming from the right is going to be able to go through this hand if you bend the wrist like this. Or if it's facing this way, it can come this from right and going upward. And again, that would fit with the other wounds that we see that are all going from the right to the left and a little bit upward, sometimes a little bit downward, and not much in the way of forward or backward, but some variation on those.
Thank you, Doctor. You then describe a quarter-inch superficial stab wound above the back of the hand in reference to the fifth metacarpal. So I'm pointing that out, Judge. Or I'm sorry, Dr. Coswell.
That's this wound here. The metacarpals are our hand bones. The carpals are our wrist bones, metacarpals are our hand bones, and our fingers are called phalanges. So the hand bones are actually, when you look at an x-ray, what looks like a hand or what looks like your fingers is actually your metacarpals for the most part. And so that's over the bone leading to your little finger. That's the fifth metacarpal.
You then describe, sir, a horizontal 3/4 inch stab wound between the fourth and fifth metacarpals going completely through the hand, incising bone and tendon, and exiting through a 5/16 inch wound on the palm. Sir, I'm showing you 204/23. What that one about?
That's this wound. You can actually see the end of a severed tendon right here. And obviously this would be the fifth and the fourth metacarpals.
You describe it exiting the palm. Could you please point out the exit?
And that's the exit right here in the wrinkled surface of the palm.
Thank you. You describe a perforating stab wound of the index finger entering the back of the finger through a 9/16 inch wound. The incises tendon and bone of the first phalanx, exiting the palmar aspect of the finger through a 5/16 inch wound. Returning to 204/23, point that out.
That's this wound here. It's on the first joint or the first phalanx of the phalange of the index finger. And this one goes through the finger and comes out on the palm surface. You can see here's the thumb and the index finger here, and this is where it comes out.
For the record, 204/26. Doctor, you said earlier...
John, I can catch up. Not present. Not present.
Yes.
It may be time for a break. We're already at noon. It's been a long morning of testimony. I started tracking each one of these wounds. I got through about the first 14 or so. And realized we're less than a third of the way through. I think we're nearing the halfway mark as far as the number of injuries, depending on how many. There were times he said there's a cluster of wounds, like on the base of the neck and the armpit area. There are multiple stab wounds to the scapula, multiple slice injuries in the shoulder area. I'm not sure how many we're grouping together, so I don't know exactly how much is left.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is 5 minutes after 12. We did not get a mid-morning break. I want to get through as much as possible. So we're going to take our lunch break at this point.
Whoa, that's rough.
It's 5 minutes after 12. We'll try to resume this jury trial at 1:20.
1:20 is that. It's always tough to take a lunch break mid medical examiner testimony, especially graphic testimony like this. I'll tell you, when watching Mr. Chen, as that's been the safe shot for the camera during a lot of this testimony, he's been looking down, but if you watch his eyebrows...
Anything to bring up before we take the lunch break? Either something. Okay. We'll see you back at 1:20.
1:20.
Walking away, every now and again, okay.
1:20 we come back. Let me say this. As he's looking down, and let me see if I can position my head so you can see it. You're looking from the other side here, but you're looking down. You can see his eyebrow over his right eye. So this is a mirror image, and he's looking down, and then you see this. The eyebrows go up. The eyebrows grow up when they switch photographs, and then he glances up, and then he'll glance back down. It's almost like he has a curiosity of some sort to see each image, while still trying to portray I can't look at this. I'm not sure if anyone else has caught that or noticed that, but he does seem to want to see each of the pictures. But then he looks away. In my opinion, are any of the wounds defensive? Yes. We've got a lot of injuries on her left hand, some to the outside of the pinky area, some to the front, some to the back, the palm, some to the back. The wrist area, lots of injuries in this area. This was the free hand. Her right hand was handcuffed to her right ankle, and her feet were shackled together, is my understanding. But the shackles were broken. And why did nobody make a big deal out of this? I realize, these aren't like corrections officer grade shackles. These are something that would probably be found in a kinky store somewhere, but they were steel, they were metal, they're like chrome plated steel. They were broken. I want to know, how much force that takes to break that little link, to pry that apart. Is this somebody who was bound and was struggling against it, and then it broke because they're cheap? They will. It's highly likely that. Well, I'll say this. It seems extremely unlikely to me that those were put on against her will. I don't know why. They have a latch. They had the keys attached. I believe that she probably was playing along with something that went very dark very fast, and something that was maybe okay suddenly became not okay. And in that time, there's no chance to let me find the little latch and detach the handcuffs. It just you've got bruising on the right hand. You've got bruising on. We talked about the skeletal bones. We talked to them down by the wrist on the inside and the outside. This is where the handcuffs sit. This is where you would be struggling against instinctively to pull your hand away, to try to defend yourself, to move. I would say that we very much are seeing defensive injuries, or signs that this definitely took place in a setting where she was the victim, not making an attack. This does not fit the scenario that we get from her attacking him, with all the injuries being located in the same area. The force that was used. Oh my! Look, I'm going to use a little tiny demonstration plastic knife here. The force to break the tip of the blade off in the body, it was thrust in with so much force that the knife bent in the middle, like here, and it bent far enough that it snapped across it. So that force at that point for the break point to be inside the body, it has to be applied from the outside. A ton of force. It shattered the bone on the rib cage on the other side. The knife, I'm not sure if the skeleton's the right size. Sorry, Mr. Skelly. But coming in through the back by the scapula and hitting the fourth rib cage. Let's see if I can show this here. Coming in the back like this and hitting the fourth bone in the rib cage on the front. Oops, I just lost the stand. And then, she probably was on the ground. That rib was probably up against something firm. And then there's enough pressure still that the knife blade breaks off inside the body. That is a ton of force. It could account for a couple things. We heard that some of these cuts had a fishtail end on them, right? So instead of just making, a knife, like a kitchen knife, like the kind that was used, a chef's knife, has a dull side and it has the sharp side. Well, the sharp side cuts, but it leaves a fishtail at the end, meaning it cuts in and wiggles a little bit. When the knife is held, if it's thrust really hard and then the grip changes to pull out, so if the knife is pushed in like this and then the hand is pulled like that to pull out, the pressure on the handle is different. It will cut differently. That accounts for it. And it's probably because the knife was covered in blood that it was difficult to grip. You had to sort of really grab it to pull it out, because the kitchen knives aren't made for to lock your fingers in place, right? There's not like a grip grooves to keep keep hold of it in case it gets slippery. They're smooth. A lot of them are like the knife that they showed that was not used. It was just a smooth aluminum handle. It would be difficult to get out. That could also account for why he had injuries to his hand. If he's stabbing and he hits something firm and his hand then slides down the knife blade and cuts his palm. These all match up for me. Oh my goodness. And it's terrible to listen to. Bug Dugger had a question. I forget, what was it that brought him to it, or did she want to leave? Bug Dugger, we don't know. We only have what the defense says is the story. Those are the only people who are there, her and him. And so whatever he's told his lawyer and his lawyer is telling us, that's the story we have. We do know that she texted her mom and she sent a pin with her location. That's all we got. There was no message that went along with it. It was in the middle of the night, like 1:30, 2:30 in the morning. And that's it. We don't know if she was attacked mid sending that. We don't know if that was just, hey, here's where I am, and then something happened afterwards. We don't have anything to go on that. Okay, now I just lost his skull. I found it. It's down on the floor. Mr. Bones here has been really putting in the work. All right. Let's see. Any other questions I can answer here? I think he only told us that she did it. I think he found something on her phone and got mad, pretended to play with her, and then turned on her. There could be a lot of scenarios like that. And honestly, I could probably come up with a couple that fit, a couple scenarios that be like, well, here's what could have happened. We'll never know unless he's truthful. And I mean, this is a guy who lies about buying asparagus when he's buying crackers. Where do you believe? What do you believe? He lies to the check stand to pay, I don't know, $1 less for whatever he's. I just don't know that the family or anyone, even if he does come out and tell all, is going to be able to look at that and say, yeah, that's what really happened. Okay. I think if my husband could use one of these in his art classrooms, you should post Scamazon. I don't. I like the Scamazon affiliate. I see what you did there. I can get a link for this. This was a gift. I don't remember who sent me this. I wish I could remember. But this was a gift from one of our viewers who also sent me. They're out of reach. I've got them down on the ground. They also sent me barbecue skewers to show penetration points and angles. Because oftentimes when we're dealing with gunshot wounds that penetrate and perforate the body, it's helpful to know where it went in and where it came out. So that's what we use Mr. Bones for. I do not have room for a full-size Mr. Bones. You guys, I'm in an old house, and the house is small. Okay, we'll get Mr. Bones put away here in just a second. But We've got one. Oh, he almost hit the end stream button. He's trying to be more helpful than we want. The skewers are all calibrated. Yes, they are. All right. This testimony, we knew this was going to be tough. This is, the jurors have so far, no breaks. Usually when we have really difficult testimony like this from a medical examiner, we get breaks. The judge is like, all right, let's have a break. The jury is all invested. I bet their notepads are covered with questions, and they're asking some. I hope they ask questions about that broken chain. They show, and maybe it'll be someone else that testifies this, but does it show that, what was the break? Was it cut? Was the missing link never found? Was the link pried open? Does it look like it was pulled? Is there damage to something else that looks like the handcuff was cuffed to that and broke free? Because that's a possibility. That's important. Let's see. Do we have pics of any of the wounds on him? Not yet, but we should. There should be some photographs. When he was taken into custody, he was examined and photographed, and we haven't seen them yet. Those are going to come at a later point. But we know he had an injury that was in some state of healing to his hand. Okay. I think Mr. Bones needs CPR. He needs a skull first. He needs a skull to keep his brains in. A lot of hand wounds, Jessica. This screams to me defensive wounds, and the fact that there's like virtually nothing on her right hand and everything on her left hand. Does that not just completely solidify that she was in fact restrained? Her right hand was restrained and handcuffed to her right ankle, just like she was found in the suitcase. Doesn't that make sense? Red Pen sent Mr. Bones. Thank you, Red Pen, for that. He has been most helpful. Although now I need to get the stand back up at the floor, which I can do with my unshoed feet quite easily. I know this is ungraceful, Mr. Skeleton, but that's how you get back on the stand. Okay, I got his skull back. We've got somebody calling in. Hold on just 1 second.
Call from
Donald.
Hey, Donald, this is RA. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Not bad. What's on your mind?
As a former corrections officer, and I've also had been dispenser, and I've actually got those handcuffs.
All right, for instructive purposes, yes. Okay, let's go on.
Yeah, when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So, and I know that the chain link on those are really not very strong at all. If he was stabbing her and she was fighting,
it would have broke.
It could have broken easily.
Yeah.
Whether it did or not, I don't know, but it's very plausible that it could have broke quite. They were in the middle of him stabbing her.
Yeah. Man, it's crazy. It's amazing how much science can tell us, how much a medical examiner can tell us about what happened and paint the picture of the story through injuries. The thing that's really stand out to me is the type of cuts, the slicing cuts that show that she was very much alive when those were made. A slicing cut. Let me just say this. Most people cannot just sit there and be like, I'm okay with you cutting my arm or my shoulder. I think they were on the shoulder.
Right.
Multiple cuts across the skin. Most people would react unless they were restrained and unable to do so.
Absolutely.
And those were done when she could bleed and that the blood could spread throughout that area. That screams of torture to me. Okay, she's alive. Right. She's got full blood pressure. And then some of the other cuts, how much force is needed to stab through the scapula, go penetrate all the way through the lung, crush the rib, and break the knife.
Exactly.
This was vicious. The stab mark, the stab through her neck that went through the right side and came out the left all the way, cut the larynx, cut the jugular. This is brutal. And for them to be able to say self-defense or crime of passion, nope.
Yeah, I really don't know how the defense comes back from this witness. It's devastating to him.
Yeah, it is. Donald,
but that's all I wanted to let you know is that the chain on those handcuffs could break easily. The link's not very strong on them. So
I appreciate you doing that, so I didn't have to go out and buy some for my own, investigative purposes. But thank you very much, Donald. Have a good one.
Cat.
We'll see you.
Have a good one.
Bye. All right. Oh, this is a tough one. I would say for educational purposes only, right? The conversation I would have to have with the clerk if I went in there is like, look, let me explain. They're like, no, just pay for it. No, I feel like I need to explain. I have a YouTube channel. We follow court cases. Look here, can I get you a sticker? This is proof I have a YouTube channel. I'm only buying these to understand how this could have worked. I would feel compelled to have that conversation, which would be awkward as well. Let's see. Then you can write it off as an expense with the lobster. I still have not had the lobster conversation with my wife. I need to do that. Let me do this, though. We've got a lot of texts. Let's see. Carol sends a question. Oh, okay. Carol, yes. I will respond to yours. Got it. Let's see. Mary. I'm not going to read these all out loud. Oh, this is a long one. Okay, well, I'll look at that here in just a minute. Buy stuff like that around Halloween. Just buy online. No one has to know. Amazon knows, and that's worse. I have no basis for this, but I firmly believe there will be a point in the future where everyone's Amazon histories will be made public. And I love Amazon, but Amazon knows everything from our movie choices, our music, our I use between YouTube and Amazon. Those are my go-to search engines, right? And sometime in the future, it's just going to happen. Whether somebody hacks it, whether legally they require it to be disclosed or something, just shop and use the internet as if at some point everything you do is going to be made public. That's my recommendations. How many handcuffs will be in RA's P.O. box next week? No. Oh, okay. Then they'll know how many cables. I will tell you how many cables we buy. I buy all the cables. All right. I was trying to say this during the break. This is heavy testimony. This is hard to listen to. And it is healthy to get up and have a break. And now is lunchtime. That's a good time to do that. So I would encourage all of you. I know it's possible to go and watch other things and dig deeper into this. It's good for us to have a break, and let's reset and come back. We're going to take a break. We'll be back. They say they're going to be back at 1:20. I'm showing that it is 12:20 right now. So we'll be back in about 50 minutes. We'll have a few minutes to get started before they do. So I guess I should probably play the music if I'm going to end everything, right? There we go. Watch some Golden Girls. Handcuffs and hot chocolate. That's the name of my Amazon list. I'll see if I can make a portal really quickly. I don't have one ready yet, but... All right, it's ready that quick. I tell you, I'm getting good at this YouTube thing. 2 years of practice, it's starting to pay off. All right, our portal is now in place. Thank you very much. We'll say tonight when you go home, please hug the people you love, smile at someone, make their day just a little bit better. Please stay safe till we go live at 1:15. We'll be back for part 2 of day 4 of the Tennessee versus Chen trial, which has been at moments very slow and at moments on the edge of our seat. Right now, the ME, who is probably, I would put him in my top 3 MEs ever, is on the stand testifying about each individual injury that Jasmine sustained. And I don't know where defense is going to go from here, but they don't have much room, and it's not looking good. Guys, we'll be back. It's getting better as this goes on. There's going to be the moment where he testifies, probably near the end of his testimony, that he believes, according to his professional opinion, that Jasmine was restrained at the time of these injuries, and spell it out that way. That's what we're listening for. Guys, have a great lunch. We'll see you afterwards. Bye-bye.
Now at Murdoch.